Chapter 203. Tonks finds Draco. Tonks's eyes narrowed as she confronted Draco. So, all the resentments and the Dementors are truly gone? Draco met her gaze with an unsettling calm. Azkaban isn't a prison anymore, you see. Harry, standing just behind them, felt his pulse quicken. Dementors, those hollow echoes of despair, could never be killed. They could only be repelled by the Patronus charm. They were less creatures than manifestations of raw, negative emotion, akin to a parasitic fungus thriving on human suffering. Their only true defeat would come if the endless cycle of death and sorrow that fed them were broken. But even if Voldemort's darkest magic reduced decades' worth of rancor to ashes, the Dementors would not simply vanish overnight. After all, they first emerged in the 15th century, born of the tortured souls collected by the cruel wizard Axtis, and they still prowled Azkaban's ramparts 200 years later, when Damocles Roll became Minister of Magic. In fact, Roll owed much of his influence to the prison's grim legacy. As a descendant of those who helped establish Azkaban, he could tap into its dark power and mold it into what he called Tartarus magic. Tonks swallowed hard, her voice trembling. Then, how do we ever stop them for good? Harry paced the Gryffindor common room, brow furrowed. Even though the Dementors and the Inferi have vanished, the prison itself shouldn't have. Draco said the wizarding world still believes Azkaban is a wizard prison, but now there's nothing left. Even if the island was razed, some trace would remain. How could Voldemort have erased it completely? He must have uncovered the secret of the Roll family's magic, Hermione offered quietly. Ron looked up, puzzled. But no one in the Roll line ever joined the Death Eaters. Luna, reading beside him, tilted her head. In the original timeline, Thorfinn Roll did swear loyalty to Voldemort. Harry's eyes brightened. Exactly. Perhaps Voldemort learned to resurrect himself through that lineage. And Azkaban itself, or whatever was left of it, has become part of him. Hermione nodded. Without a surviving Roll heir, Voldemort couldn't fully harness the magic of Tartarus before. Now, stripped of a physical body, he's fused with the Dementors, the Inferi, even the lingering curses of the prison. In effect, Azkaban has been absorbed into his very being. Harry stopped pacing and stared at his friends. So when Azkaban disappeared, it didn't just vanish, it was subsumed into Voldemort's soul. Silence fell as the group grappled with the dark realization. Finally, Ron exhaled. That actually makes a terrifying sort of sense. Harry's voice cut through the night air. Azkaban isn't a fortress anymore, it's part of a living thing. Ron and Draco exchanged baffled looks. An island, they both said almost in unison. I never would have guessed that. Harry took a step forward, eyes alight with urgency. Think about Hagrid. Ron frowned. Hagrid? How does he figure into this? From where I stand, Hagrid is the Forbidden Forest, Harry replied. You might not feel it, but he's become one with the wild magic that binds that place. Draco shook his head in disbelief. If that's true, how can it be good news? Won't Voldemort only grow stronger? Just look at Hagrid now, Harry said, voice urgent. He's changed, growing into something more, something alive. That's what they intend for Voldemort. They want to resurrect him. They're planning a resurrection? Ron whispered, taking a small step back. Harry nodded. Yes, and you may not know this, but only a truly resurrected Dark Lord can ever be killed for good. Without another word, Harry drew his wand and traced a swift, intricate pattern through the air. At once, the wind stilled, the rustling of leaves froze, and even the distant clang of combat died away. The forest fell into an uncanny, absolute silence. Draco's voice trembled. Is that really true? Ron's eyes were wide as he stared at Harry's determined face, the hush of the woods pressing in, around them. In that moment, they all understood how fragile and how crucial the next moments would be. Harry paused, the soft glow of his wand casting long shadows on the walls. Yes, he said quietly. Voldemort used a forbidden spell, something far darker than any mere spirit-binding curse, to trap what was left of himself in this world. He became less than a ghost, yet more than nothing. That evil magic chained him to life, even in that husk of a body. Ron frowned. So as long as he hasn't been fully resurrected, no matter how many centuries pass, he can still come back. Exactly, Harry replied. Thousands of years wouldn't matter. The moment the right conditions are met, he can return. Draco leaned forward, his pale face tense. But everything Dumbledore and the others have been doing, they're not trying to stop Voldemort's return. They're actually setting the stage for his resurrection. Harry met his gaze. That's the grim irony. At this moment, we hold every advantage. Dumbledore's guidance, Hagrid's loyalty, even the presence of the younger Voldemort we lured through the veil, you name it. And then there's the Ministry of Magic, united in a way we've never seen, now controlling the Daily Prophet as its own propaganda mouthpiece. Draco's eyes darkened. It's an open conspiracy. Voldemort must know about it, but he's forced to go along. He has no choice but to activate the ritual that will make him more powerful than ever when he's reborn. Ron swallowed hard. So once he's resurrected, he'll be unstoppable? And what about us? Hermione asked from the corner, voice steady but strained. Harry lifted his wand, determination flashing in his eyes. That is precisely what we're here to figure out. Draco tapped his fingers on the table. Wait, Harry, didn't you say there was one more piece of this puzzle? Ron pressed his lips together. Please let it be good news. Harry took a steadying breath. We have one last ace to play, something Voldemort won't see coming. But first... He paused, glancing at each of them in turn. We need to prepare. Draco frowned as he watched Ron's uneasy expression, and even Harry seemed distracted. Everything appeared to be falling into place. His business was thriving, his relationship with Lavender was finally stable, and life at Hogwarts felt almost peaceful. Yet Harry's warning gnawed at him. If Voldemort truly returned when he opened his eyes tomorrow, all of that could vanish in an instant. Should we push the timetable back? Draco asked, lowering his voice. Harry let out a slow breath. You know as well as I do what that would mean. Voldemort's resurrection clashes completely with Ryan's and my plan to claim the Resurrection Stone next year. I've thought it through. Nothing short of the Dark Lord's return would make me abandon this course. But you're not saying you're unshakable, Draco pressed. Harry met his gaze steadily. You've heard me say it before. This wedding banquet isn't just a celebration of two families united. It's more like an engagement ceremony for the pure-blood elite across Britain. Everyone who's anyone will be there, watching, waiting. If Voldemort reappears, it won't just ruin tomorrow, it'll undermine everything we've built. Draco settled back into his chair, running a hand through his pale hair. You remember that family banquet I told you about? It was supposedly to welcome back a squib cousin, but in reality, almost every branch of the Black family turned up. Some of them haven't spoken in years, and others still cling to old vendettas. Harry and Ron exchanged glances. Draco continued. Even Tonks was there. My mother's niece, Aunt Andromeda's daughter, who was disowned from the Black Line long ago. He shook his head. She cornered me late Sunday night, right after the last of the guests had departed. Harry frowned. Why? Does Tonks's family object to her relationship with Lupin? It shouldn't be an issue, Draco said, his voice steady. After all, Tonks's mother married a Muggle-born wizard purely for love. Why would Lupin's, or rather, a boy, Airwolf's, status matter, especially since condition has been cured and he holds a respectable post as an associate professor at Hogwarts? At that, Harry sat up straighter. Hold on, this isn't Tonks's side. It's Lupin himself who's balking. He's refusing to see her again. Draco's pale eyebrows drew together. Precisely. Tonks came to me in hopes that I'd persuade Lupin to reconsider. Meanwhile, over the weekend, Lupin had promised my sister he'd make peace with Tonks. Clearly, he's gone back on his word. Ron, who'd been listening in confusion, finally spoke up. So Tonks sought you out because Lupin shut her out? That sounds messy. Draco's jaw tightened. Messy is one word for it. He paused, staring into his hands. But I won't let Lupin treat her that way. Harry forced a smile. Maybe Lupin's just been swamped lately. After all, he only recently came to terms with Fenrir's incarnation. I suppose in time we'll hear about Lupin and Tonks getting engaged. But deep down, Harry knew his optimism was misplaced. Chapter 204, Herbology Class. Harry never imagined his instincts would prove correct. Over the next few days, Lupin began to steer clear of them entirely, almost as if he sensed that Tonks had asked Harry and his friends to intervene on his behalf. He even missed Gryffindor's Saturday match against Ravenclaw, an event he would normally never skip. They talked about trailing him, but Lupin's agility, honed through his mysterious training with Feniel's incarnation, was simply beyond their reach. Harry chased him again and again, catching only fleeting glimpses of his back before Lupin slipped away. After all, Harry's transformation magic focused on reinforcing life forces and delving into the heart of magical energy, useful, but no match for Lupin's supernatural swiftness. Fred and George knew the feeling well. Having spent 2 weeks dodging Filch, they'd learned firsthand how terrifying an opponent with unflagging mobility and intimate knowledge of Hogwarts' secret passages could be. In desperation, they even wrote to Sirius for advice. His reply was blunt: "You're still too young. Remus knows what he's doing." And so Lupin remained beyond their reach, leaving Harry more puzzled and more determined than ever. "They're all such bastards." Ginny's voice trembled with anger as she grabbed Lavender's hand. Together, they glared at Harry and Ron, as though the two of them were personally to blame. "Honestly," Ginny seethed, "I can see where Lupin's coming from." Harry opened his mouth to protest, but Lavender cut in. What about our feelings?" she demanded. Ron shifted uneasily, but Ginny's eyes bored into him. She knew he'd been whispering excuses, even though he'd tried to say them farther away. With Voldemort rising again, Lupin can't exactly make any promises right now, Ron muttered desperately, but it was too late. Ginny had already heard. She stared so hard at her brother that Harry almost yelped. "And what about Mum?" Ginny snapped. "During the First Wizarding War, she stayed married to Dad through it all. She never—" "Ginny, please," Lavender pleaded, but Ginny wouldn't calm down. For nearly a week afterward, Lavender refused even to look at Ron. By the time the quarrel faded, summer had stolen over Hogwarts, wrapping its grounds in a wary peace. The Great Lake lay pale blue beneath hints of violet dawn, and in Professor Sprout's greenhouses, Abyssinian shrinking figs flaunted flowers the size of cabbages. In herbology, Sprout directed the students to prune the wilting branches. Harry bent to gather the deadwood for the compost pile when a familiar voice stopped him. "Potter." Draco Malfoy leaned against the glass, arms folded. His gray eyes were unreadable. "Malfoy," Harry said, dropping the branches. Draco's lips curved in a half-smirk. "Have you seen Professor Lupin lately?" Harry hesitated. "Not since the meeting in the Hog's Head." Draco's eyebrows rose. "Tonks has been writing to me, says she can't reach him." He paused, as though weighing his next words. "If you run into him, tell him I'm looking for him." Harry nodded, puzzled. As he turned back to the compost heap, he realized that even allies could slip into secrecy when dark times loomed, and that some alliances were more fragile than others. Summer days at Hogwarts might be long and golden, but shadows lay in wait just beyond the glass. Harry chose his words carefully. The breakout at Azkaban is tied to Voldemort. Remus has been swamped with it lately. For some reason, Tonks, though she's an active Auror, had been in touch with Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, even though he officially retired years ago. He's still a trusted member of the Order of the Phoenix, and Tonks's last letter hinted that she'd learned something important. But it's been a week now with no word from her. Before that, she used to write almost every day. Harry shook his head, annoyed. Draco Malfoy wandered over and picked up a pair of secateurs to help Harry and Ron clear away the dead branches of the Abyssinian fig tree. "Maybe we never should have stuck our noses in this," Harry admitted, snapping off a brittle twig. "If Tonks thinks we're unreliable, maybe she's trying to get Moody to push our names forward for the Order." "Remus might keep us at arm's length," Draco agreed, "but he can't hide from the rest of them." "And Tonks doesn't need to," Harry said. "She meets all their criteria. She's an Auror with a perfectly clean family record." Just then, Ron yanked a shriveled fig from the tree. He held it up, eyebrows raised. "Do you think this is edible?" he asked, casting a furtive glance at Professor Sprout, who was passing by. He certainly didn't want to lose any more house points. Professor Pomona Sprout's gentle smile vanished as she leaned over her prized specimens. "The shrinking fig is a truly remarkable magical plant," she began, her tone brisk. "The finest examples hail from Abyssinia. Unlike most figs, its true flower develops inside the fruit, sharing the same deep purple hue. It's deciduous, dropping its leaves in autumn and standing bare through winter, but thanks to an exceptionally robust root system, it survives even under heavy snow." She paused to pluck a leaf and hold it up to the light. "These leaves are valued for their medicinal properties, and when you peel open a mature fruit, a vivid purple sap oozes out. That sap is a key ingredient in many brews, shrinking potions chief among them. Harry nudged Ron with a brittle branch. Do you think it's edible? He murmured. Ron dropped his voice to a whisper. Don't let Professor Sprout hear you, he warned. A few Hufflepuffs have a habit of sneaking off with bits of these plants for late-night snacks, but she's got some enchantment that lets her trace even the smallest fragment. Fruit, flower, leaf, it doesn't matter. You could tuck it deep under your robes, hide it behind a portrait, even bury it under the greenhouse soil, and she'll still find it. He lowered his tone even further. If she spots any leftovers, even months later, you lose house points on the spot. The only foolproof way to avoid detection, they say, is to eat it all. I heard Dudley did exactly that once. Didn't stop him from getting caught, though. Slytherin nabbed a bunch of points for it. Harry grinned, eyes alight at the thought of a forbidden midnight feast, but he wisely kept his question to himself as Professor Sprout cleared her throat and resumed the lesson. He'd once dodged detention by swallowing a raw jumping toadstool. Draco propped himself on the edge of a greenhouse bench, a smug grin playing across his lips. Still loathe potions, I take it? Herbology's no better? Harry didn't glance up from his parchment. This year, Professor Sprout taught us 4 notorious poisonous plants: venomous tentacula, mandrakes, jumping toadstools, and the Abyssinian shrinking fig. Draco rolled his eyes. If you'd been paying attention, you'd know Sprout always warns which specimens can't be eaten without leaving a trace. He waved a hand. The jumping toadstool is a key ingredient in the Wiggenweld brain stimulant potion. The Abyssinian shrinking fig, one of the only fresh components in the shrinking solution, yet apparently quite tasty. Harry reached into his bag, plucked a glossy fig, and popped it into his mouth. It tastes good. Ron, about to follow suit, froze at Harry's grin. He chewed hesitantly, and immediately regretted it, spitting the half-masticated fruit onto the stone floor. You idiot, Draco laughed, mimicking Sprout's stern tone. Dried figs are fairly harmless, she warned, but they're juice. Mark my words, you'll regret tasting it. Ron's eyes widened. Wait, Harry, did you really say it tastes good? Why didn't you remind me earlier? He groaned, slumping onto a nearby stool. Draco's laughter echoed through the glasshouse, finally banishing the knot of anxiety he'd carried ever since Tonks's letter failed to arrive. In Ron's misery, at least, he'd found a welcome distraction. Remind me of what? Harry asked, still baffled by Ron's train of thought. The shrinking drought, Ron blurted out. It can eat or miniaturize the drinker or revert them to a younger version of themselves. Some old witches actually gamble with it, risking permanent shrinkage, just to take back a few years. And then there's the Buffy Brain Refresher, which boosts your intelligence for a limited time. Even after the potion wears off, you retain a slight edge in your thinking. Harry and Draco exchanged uneasy looks as Ron ran a hand through his hair. Why didn't anyone point out how crucial our herbology lessons have been this year? He groaned. If I'd recognized these plants sooner, we could have brewed both potions for a fortune in gold galleons. A deep frown knotted Ron's brow. Harry and Draco fell silent, unsure of how to respond to their friend's bitter regret. Chapter 205, Neville Becomes Strong. Harry broke the silence at last. Ron, do you remember which year we first encountered the shrinking solution in class? Ron scratched the back of his head and gave an embarrassed grin. 3rd year, obviously. Exactly, Harry said, nodding. That shows just how simple it is to brew. Listen carefully. 1. Chop the daisy roots into uniform pieces. 2. Peel the skins off the shrivel figs. 3. Slice the caterpillars into thin segments. 4. Place 5 caterpillar slices into the cauldron and heat until the liquid turns red. 5. Add the peeled shrivel figs a little at a time, stirring until the potion shifts from red to yellow. 6. Continue heating until it deepens to purple. 7. Toss in a small scrap of mouse spleen. 8. Stir in the chopped daisy roots. Once the mixture turns green, add 5 drops of leech juice. 9. Introduce more shrivel figs until the brew becomes a delicate pink. 10. Finally, add 1 last chopped caterpillar and a dash of hemlock essence. Heat just until the potion settles into a vibrant green. Straightforward, right? I won't bore you with the exact stirring schedule. So, Ron, planning to make your fortune selling shrinking solution? Harry shook his head. There's no real money to be made selling this to those old codgers. It's too crude, his companion agreed. This potion only works while it's still boiling. The moment it cools, it loses its effect. You'd have to reheat it every time. Harry raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does it do? She sighed. That's the catch. You either get lucky and reverse the aging process, or you get unlucky and shrink to thumb size. And once the transformation happens, it lasts indefinitely, unless you take the anti-shrinking draught. So it's a massive gamble, Harry said. Dangerous too, she replied. Zygmunt Budge, the famous apothecary who invented it, once tested it on the Tertius brothers. They all ended up the size of beetles and spent days cowering under a cupboard, terrified their cats would find them. She leaned back. With risks like that, the profit margin isn't anywhere near what you'd hope. Harry tapped his finger against his temple. Sounds like an easy problem to solve. Her lips curved into a faint smile. My Aunt Muriel had her own workaround. Before taking the shrinking potion, she'd stand on a low chair with a tiny vial of anti-shrinking tonic balanced underneath. The moment she began to shrink, she'd be in the perfect position to grab it and restore herself. Harry paused at the edge of the greenhouse, watching his two friends bicker by a stack of fertilizer sacks. Sunlight filtered through the glass panes, illuminating drifting motes of dust. If she'd stayed small enough, Ron muttered absently, I'd have just picked her up and carried her around everywhere. He shook his head, a wistful smile tugging at his lips. If she'd grown up, I suppose I'd have that beautiful young Aunt Muriel in my memories instead. Draco Malfoy scoffed from where he was leaning against the potting bench. So that's why you hide her photograph under your pillow every night? Shut up! Ron snapped, flinging a bag of organic fertilizer at Draco. The bag sailed past Malfoy's ear, landing with a thud in the trash can. The bin groaned, then let out a ludicrously loud belch. While Draco glared at the dust-covered bag, Ron turned to Harry with pleading eyes. What about the Buffy brain refresher? Harry tucked a stray lock of hair behind his ear. Honestly, you'd be better off grabbing a pouch of Dragonclaw powder. Take that, and your memory sharpens in a few hours. No fuss. Ron frowned. But the Buffy brain refresher is supposed to be permanent, isn't it? Harry nodded. True, it does boost your cognitive function long-term, but it's tricky to brew, and you can't learn it here at Hogwarts. One slip-up in the potion's preparation, and it becomes downright dangerous for your brain. Ron ran a hand through his hair, weighing his options. Beyond them, the greenhouse door swung open as a fresh bray, as it carried the scent of roses and earth inside. The dilemma still hung in the warm air, quick fix or lasting improvement, simplicity or risk. Silence settled among the three, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant chatter of students in the castle corridors. At last, Ron sighed. All right, Dragonclaw powder it is. But one day I'm going to master that Buffy potion, even if it kills me trying. Draco rolled his eyes, shoving the fertilizer bag deeper into the trash. Harry simply laughed, clapping his friend on the shoulder. As they left the greenhouse together, Ron's earlier worries seemed a little lighter, if only, for now, he could remember where he left his homework. Harry shook his head. The thing is, this potion isn't like the others. You can't tell whether it's worked just by its color or its scent. Ron gave him an encouraging grin. Come on, Harry. You're not like the rest of us. There's no way you'd botch it. Draco, leaning against a nearby table, pretended to gag. Besides, those leaping toadstools are easy enough to find. The recipe's straightforward. Rune spore eggs, Dragonclaw powder, hopping mushrooms, and frog brains. Harry arched an eyebrow. Why not skip the potion altogether and just eat Dragonclaw powder? Draco snorted. And waste rune spore eggs? You know how pricey those are. It feels like a thankless task, Harry muttered. Ron shrugged. You've got to figure there's a reason this potion never made it onto shop shelves. Harry folded his arms. Merlin's beard. It's a real challenge to brew. Seriously, Ron grumbled. Why is getting rich always so darn hard? His smoke bottle business had reached saturation. He was pulling in a steady 100 galleons a month, but for a wizard who insisted on using dragonhide tape, that barely scratched the surface. Draco, the self-proclaimed connoisseur of luxury, shot Ron a skeptical look. Just as Harry, Ron, and Draco were talking, Neville ambled by, carrying a jar of Abyssinian shrunken figs. He looked perfectly at ease as he made his way toward Professor Sprout. When did Neville get so strong? Ron whispered, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. Harry stared, mouth agape. The pudgy cheeks he remembered had become defined, and that once round belly was now flat. How had they all missed it? Harry's mind raced back to Neville's old routine. Rising at 6 each morning for digestive potions, spending free moments with Ginny, or searching for Lupin. Bundled under heavy robes in the chill of early spring, any change in his shape would have been easy to overlook. Could he have learned that Fenrir transformation charm by contracting lycanthropy? Draco suggested. He'd heard that a few Slytherins had taken a half-term leave to master the spell, which was rumored to produce dramatic physical effects. Impossible, Ron said, shaking his head. Neville never asked for leave. This chapter is not yet finished. Neville had grown strangely withdrawn in recent weeks, vanishing for hours on end. Thankfully, his roommate Ron always knew exactly where to find him. "What are you staring at?" Anthony asked, joining Harry and the others in their hushed conversation. Harry nodded toward a secluded grove just beyond the castle walls. "That's Neville. Have you noticed how much stronger he looks? He's gone from the timid, scrawny guy we all knew to someone almost unrecognizable. I swear, I see Dudley's workout routine in him." "Seriously?" Anthony frowned. "Neville Longbottom, more muscle?" Before anyone could answer, Michael spoke up. "He's been training like mad. Nobody's quite sure where he got it, but he's somehow come into possession of a solid iron sword. Every afternoon he slips out here to practice. Most of the time, though, he'll just sit cross-legged in the grass, sword laid across his knees, eyes closed, meditating or something. It's bizarre." Terry rolled his eyes. "Bet he's been reading too many nightly romances." As the astronomy club's lead assistant under Professor Sinistra, he'd first spotted Neville lurking in a thicket near the telescope during their late-night stargazing sessions. Anthony grinned at Ron. "Told you he'd slimmed down. Fancy a wager on what he's up to?" Ron shook his head with a rueful smile. "At this point, I just hope he isn't planning to challenge a troll." Anthony had always been Harry's biggest fan, and he secretly dreamed of edging Ron out to stand by Harry's side. Lately, though, his new income meant frequent snack runs, and he definitely packed on a few pounds. His pudgy frame had become the butt of more than one teasing remark. Harry, on the other hand, had been hitting the gym. He'd grown noticeably stronger over the past month, his arms and chest firming up with each workout. Seeing Harry so muscular gave Anthony hope. Now they had something in common to chat about, a fresh topic to keep him close. Thank you to Pupucha Kia for the monthly ticket, and thanks to everyone who's recommended or subscribed. Chapter 2 at 6, The Wandless Death Eaters. "Why the long face?" Kate's voice sliced through the quiet common room, surprisingly informal for a British magic school. She lounged cross-legged on the sofa, dressed in a crisp white robe of the Japanese Magic Institute, her cherrywood wand balanced lightly between her fingers. Ryan sat opposite her, eyes fixed on the bare stone wall, as if expecting some hidden inscription to reveal itself. "Just bored," Ryan replied with a shrug. "Harry and the others are only now noticing Neville's changes. It's taking forever." He gave her a half-smile. "Honestly, screw it." Kate tilted her head. "Ninguso, koremo banyu desu ka?" she repeated, her big eyes widening in curiosity. "Since when do you speak Japanese?" Ryan sprang to his feet, startled. "When did you teach me Japanese?" A mischievous grin lit Kate's face. "Back when I asked you to call me Lane-sensei." He blinked. "You mean?" Kate leaned forward. "You still belt out Japanese songs, don't you? I remember you singing, Saki wa matsu no rureki mi o mite ita." She hummed a few bars, then stopped. "But seriously, what's with the outfit? That white robe from the Japanese Institute, the cherrywood wand at your side. This isn't standard Hogwarts issue." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "You do know what white robes mean in the Japanese wizarding world, right?" Kate's grin faltered. "No?" "In Japan," Ryan said, folding his arms, "white robes are worn by disenfranchised Death Eaters, those who've lost their original wands. It's a mark of disgrace. You get stripped of rank, get a substitute wand if you're lucky, and don that white robe until you earn your wand back." Kate's eyes widened. She glanced around the room theatrically before leaning in, genuinely interested. "So, you're wandless? That cherrywood stick is just a placeholder?" "Exactly," Ryan sighed. "Long story, but hey, at least I look the part." Kate laughed. Well, you certainly put a new spin on Death Eater chic. Ryan rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. Thanks, I think. Kate cast her eyes toward the distant mountaintop, as if she could already make out the jade tower gleaming in the sunlight. All Japanese wizards trace their training back to one of our 11 internationally recognized magic schools. Ours is the smallest, more like a palace than a campus, perched on the highest peak of South Iwo Jima, that volcanic island far out in the Pacific. The entire structure is hewn from mutton-fat jade, rising in tiered pagoda-like tiers that sparkle with an otherworldly glow. She paused, letting the image settle. Unlike the other schools, which take children as boarders from age 7, ours only offers full boarding beginning at 11. From 7 to 10, students attend as day pupils, rising each morning to climb onto the backs of giant petrels, which ferry them to and from the school gates. Kate smiled at the memory of their feathered mounts. Every wizard here wears a magical robe that grows with them and shifts color as they advance in knowledge. A newcomer's robe starts out a soft pink. As the student masters new spells and subjects, the fabric deepens through a spectrum of hues, only turning true gold once they've achieved top marks in every class. Her expression sobered. And there's one final hue no one ever wants to see: white. A wizard whose robe turns white has betrayed the Japanese wizarding code, broken the law, or even compromised the international statute of secrecy. She let the warning linger in the air before turning back to her companion. So, you'd better study hard. Why are you reading off such a long list? Ryan asked, leaning against the table. Kate paused, biting her finger thoughtfully. And you do realize that white mark's a criminal, right? She hesitated, then flashed him a playful grin. Well then, Mr. Prosecutor, punish me, the prisoner, if you must. An hour later, Ryan sat up straight on the sofa. The cushion beside him looked impossibly pristine, as though cleaned by magic, and Kate had already slipped Avora out of her casual clothes and back into her usual attire. He cleared his throat. You still haven't told me why you brought up the magic school just now. Aren't you the one who likes Wagadu the most? He waited until Kate was settled before pressing on. I don't really know you yet, so it's only fair I make you explain yourself. Kate stretched out on the sofa, one brow quirking. Let me guess, she said. You're about to switch back into the teacher and student routine, mete out a few imaginary slaps for asking questions. Ryan shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Honestly, I thought our prisoner and prosecutor game was more fun. She leaned forward, licking her lips. Don't worry about the details. Ryan's expression turned serious. He inhaled deeply, then sent the question telepathically. Where is Penelo? Kate paused over the parchment, her quill poised uncertainly. She was drafting a letter to her aunt, an earnest recommendation of beginners' magical textbooks, since as a squib, her aunt had never learned the art of spellcasting. Honestly, Kate sighed, the textbooks we use at Hogwarts aren't exactly practical beyond the castle's enchanted classrooms. Ryan leaned back in his chair, amusement dancing in his eyes. True enough, he said, but still, how does a squib turn into a wizard? Kate shot him a sharp look. Don't pretend you don't know. You're the one who snuck that miraculous magic exposé into the Quibbler, for Luna Lovegood, no less. I? Ryan feigned shock, flinging his hands wide. My dear Kate, the only thing I've ever published about Luna is how wonderfully unconventional she is. Without warning, Kate sprang at him, her form blurring into a dark shadow as she lunged for the manuscript. Die! She hissed, but her strike came up empty. The parchment fluttered untouched on the desk. In that moment, the very subject of her letter, her aunt's magical apprenticeship, was forgotten. If Kate had been paying closer attention, she might have recalled the silver-wrapped gift Hermione had received through Neville's tinkering. Instead, her restless mind flitted from one distraction to the next. Only a few weeks earlier, the wizarding world had been stunned by an unbelievable breakthrough. A squib, through the reincarnation ritual of Fenrir, had genuinely awakened powerful magic. That transformation had touched Penelo's aunt, elevating her from non-magical bystander to practicing witch. Since then, Penelo herself had abandoned all her usual pranks to focus solely on her aunt's progress. After all, the woman who had shown Penelo so much kindness in her childhood now stood before a blank slate, eager to learn, if only she had the right guidance. Kate squared her shoulders, brushing aside Ryan's mocking grin. Fine, she said. Let's get back to work. First, a concise list of foundational charms. Then we can figure out how to teach them, outside Hogwarts. Ryan's grin widened. Now you're talking. Let's make your aunt's first steps into magic count. Kate took a deep breath and dipped her quill into the inkwell. This time she would stay focused. After all, an entire magical future depended on it. Kate blinked and returned to reality. No wonder she'd been so content lately. She'd been binge-watching the new series, Death Eaters in the Wild. Along with her friend Penello, she'd marveled at how the editors had transformed months of dreary prison footage into surprisingly gripping television. The show's director, Ryan, insisted on strict mortal rules. No magical shortcuts, he claimed, only genuine human struggle. Whenever the footage threatened to drag, he'd quietly introduce what he called macro controls, staging unexpected events to keep viewers on the edge of their seats. In earlier episodes, the Death Eaters had inexplicably neglected to use preservation spells on their rations. As the food rotted away, they were left with only one option: fishing off the prison's rocky reef. In the latest installment, the drama peaked. Bella, the series' lone heroine, couldn't cast magic on a whim. While, leaning over the reef to catch fish, she slipped into the surf, and in the scramble, shattered the only wand left in the cell, the last magical weapon Voldemort had smuggled into Azkaban. Stripped of that wand, and with each prisoner's single daily spell already spent, the Death Eaters now face a daunting new challenge: forging their own fishing tools by hand. Next episode teaser. Under Ryan's plan, the next installment will find the youngest Mulciber, who loathes muggles above all else, stumbling across a lone muggle book, 100 Questions on Desert Island Survival, tucked away in a dusty corner of the abandoned Azkaban fortress. The big question: what will he do with it? Ryan turned to Kate, a sly smile playing on his lips. All right, Kate, what's your call? She folded her arms. Option 1, he tears it up and burns the lot, just as he's done with every other muggle invention. Or option 2, Ryan went on, he's so shocked by the real-world horrors laid out in that survival guide, he swallows his pride and actually reads it from cover to cover. He paused dramatically. Your choice. Kate groaned. No matter what I say, I lose. Exactly. Ryan leaned back. If you pick the first, picture this. He's alone in his cell, a roaring fireplace at his side. Of course, he'll cast that book into the flames without a second thought. But if you go with the second, he chuckled. Then out of nowhere, Travers, perverted, bloodthirsty Travers, will burst in, claiming he desperately needs the loo or some other ridiculous excuse, and pry the book from his hands before he can learn a single thing. Kate rolled her eyes in exasperation. This trick again? Last time you did this, it was about a snapped wand. I picked old Mulciber, the one who can't walk straight, and what happened? Thanks to your reality of suffering twist, Bella the fisherman ended up bulking up like a bodybuilder. Ryan's grin widened. You remember that, do you? So, which is it? Kate massaged her temples. You know what? I quit. With a satisfied nod, Ryan closed his notes. All right, we'll just have to watch and see. It was unmistakably Ryan's handiwork. By all their usual patterns, Mr. Ryder, Mulcer, his son, and Travers would have drawn their wands that day, yet none of them could act. Bella's period had arrived weeks early, for reasons no one understood, and she'd been forced to use a transfiguration charm to conjure a sanitary pad, leaving her own wand tucked away and unusable. Chapter 431. Harry and Neville reveal themselves to each other, while Kate and Ryan bickered over Ryan's latest stunt, the very incident everyone had been talking about. Neville Longbottom, the same Neville Harry and his friends had mentioned, sat quietly in a remote corner of Hogwarts. A chilly wind swept across the midsummer night, but Neville seemed completely unaware of the cold. His thin training robe formed an almost mystical barrier, shutting out every distraction. He was seated cross-legged on the grass, fine strands of white silk swirling around him like ghostly threads. In his lap lay a gigantic sword, its hilt substantial, yet its blade curiously absent. All around him hovered billywig larvae, each nearly a foot long, their cobalt bodies gleaming with a jade-like sheen. They drifted at the edge of his aura in ribbons of azure light, though none dared approach closer. Neville's thoughts, however, were fixed entirely on the sword. It was unlike any blade he'd seen before, The metal glowed a deep indigo, and flowing runes traced across its surface like clouds reflected on still water. In that moment, Neville understood this mysterious weapon was called Yunzuan, a magical script not unlike the ancient runes of the distant eastern lands. In the eyes of the local muggles, cloud seals are nothing more than fanciful patterns formed by currents of vapor drifting across the sky. In reality, these seals were first inscribed by celestial deities and perfected by immortal wizards, then gifted to the human world as repositories for the universe's deepest mysteries. Neville, however, is consumed by one particular manifestation of that power, a sword, its blade irregular and serrated, each facet covered in the glowing sigils of the cloud seals. Of course, this sword exists only in Neville's mind. He spends hours each day reconstructing its shape in exquisite detail, tracing the curves of its hilt, measuring its balance, imagining the hum of energy that crackles along its edge. So engrossed is he that he often forgets his own body, as if his consciousness has merged entirely with the weapon he conjures. To help him sustain this trance-like focus, Neville recently acquired a specialized magic case from Australia, one of the rare enthusiast's props modeled on Newt Scamander's famous creature containers. Inside, a small colony of billywig flies lives in a self-contained, perfectly regulated chamber. The moment these creatures take wing, their beaters whip the air so rapidly that the resulting vibrations send Neville's mind drifting into what he describes as higher thinking. In that elevated state, the seals carved into his phantom sword glow brighter, and the arcane instructions Ryan gave him flow more effortlessly. Thanks to the billywig's ceaseless humming, Neville can now slip more readily into the subtle, demanding disciplines Ryan taught him. With each humming pulse, he redoubles his mental strokes, perfects another line of sigils, and draws ever closer to a full realization of the sword's power. Until at last, he hopes, the boundary between thought and reality will dissolve entirely. Ryan had taught Neville a deceptively simple entry spell when he first introduced him to magic. The incantation itself is just the most basic English. No tone, no emotion, not even a gesture. In theory, all it takes is a steady mind and enough willpower, something everyone supposedly possesses. Without Ryan's shortcut, Neville figured he'd be practicing indefinitely before he could make it work. Of course, every shortcut has its drawbacks. To bypass years of training, Neville must enlist the help of billywig worms, tiny, hypersensitive creatures whose stingers are as thin as needles. If Neville's mind isn't perfectly quiet, the worms panic and jab at him. One sting, and he feels a rush of dizziness as he begins to float. The more times they strike, the longer he drifts, sometimes for days. Worse still, an allergic reaction could leave him permanently airborne. There's only one way to end the floating. Pull out the small magic box in his pocket and open its door, freeing the worms to return home. Every second counts. If he delays, he risks losing control entirely. Yet despite the dizziness, the danger, and the possibility of endless levitation, Neville is convinced the shortcut is worth every risk. It's the fastest path to mastering a spell that might otherwise demand a lifetime of practice. Neville studied the sword of pure magic shimmering in Hermione's hand and couldn't help but feel puzzled. When he tried to wield or transform this same enchantment, it always hardened into a blade that refused to be altered by transfiguration. That effect was nothing like the harmony of body and will he'd managed to achieve on his own. Later that day, he cornered Hermione in the common room. "Why does your spell behave so differently for me?" he asked. Hermione tapped her chin thoughtfully. Magic often interacts in unique ways with an individual's own signature. In magical history, there are countless examples of charms that manifest only for the right person. It's possible this particular enchantment simply resonates with your innate magic. Neville nodded, recalling other odd side effects he'd noticed recently. After those billywig bugs had stung him, he hadn't felt dizzy at all. He'd even floated 2 inches off the ground. And in Charms class, whenever anyone except Harry or Professor Flitwick directed a spell at him, he could just lift a hand and watch the jinx bounce harmlessly away. He had never connected the dots before, but now it was clear. His magic was developing a disruptive quality, an almost nullifying force that could break or repel other spells. As he closed his eyes and pictured himself as that gleaming sword, he felt his magical energy swirl and reshape his very body. In that moment, he realized his resistance to outside curses was growing stronger. With each mental stroke of the blade, he forged himself into a living bulwark against magic itself. Neville's defenses were completely impervious to ordinary magic. All he had to do was wait until the phantom blade woven into his very core settled into a permanent presence. Even powerful spells that might overwhelm his natural resistance could be severed at the cost of extra magical energy by that invisible, magic-breaking sword. In theory, he could even shrug off a killing curse. Of course, Neville himself had no idea any of this was happening. He still blamed all the strange sensations in his body on the enchantment he'd cast, never realizing that it was precisely that magic which granted him such extraordinary resilience. "Who's there?" Neville demanded, springing to his feet and leveling his sword at the tree line. His free hand darted into his robe pocket, and tendrils of pale blue light flickered out, dancing in the air like restless sparks. "I almost missed you," came a familiar, surprised voice. A figure stepped forward through the underbrush. Harry Potter. He knelt to inspect the grass at Neville's feet, where a delicate lattice of white filaments traced out an intricate magic circle. "This ward masks you," Harry explained. "It makes anyone passing by simply overlook you." He glanced up at the astronomy tower, its spire looming against the night sky. "If Terry hadn't been watching from the top, no one would ever have found you down here." Harry stood and slowly circled Neville, a mixture of concern and curiosity in his green eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. "What made you set this up?" So it turned out to be Terry. Neville lowered the greatsword he'd been hefting and frowned. "Before evening practice, he was always dodging astronomy nights. You mean he actually got Professor Sinistra's approval?" Harry gave a small nod. "Yes, now he can sneak up to the astronomy tower and use the telescope every night." Neville glanced at him curiously. "And what about Ryan?" Harry met Neville's gaze. He'd seen the same telltale glow of the magic circle on Neville, and the same odd behavior, and immediately thought of Ryan, who'd been the only one in their dorm to show up at 6 each morning for extra practice. "Ryan, too," Harry admitted. Neville's brow furrowed as he looked Harry over. The wind tugged at Harry's robes, revealing the firm lines of muscle beneath. Harry held up his right hand. Instantly, a swirl of gold and crimson gathered in his palm, coalescing into a miniature phoenix. Its fiery feathers shimmered with living embers as it stretched its wings against the night air, a clear sign that the same powerful magic thrummed through Harry's veins as well. Neville lifted his right hand, and a crackling bolt of blue, lightning-like magic shot outward. In an instant, a peculiar sword of curious shape materialized in his palm. Harry and Neville exchanged astonished looks at the unexpected weapons before them, and then, as if on cue, both burst into broad, triumphant grins. Chapter 432, In the Tunnel. Sometimes sharing a secret can bind two people in unexpected ways. Harry and Neville had discovered this for themselves. These days they met in the half-forgotten tunnel beneath Hogwarts, trading confidences and practicing spells in the dim light of enchanted lanterns. Harry would quietly attempt a simple levitation charm while Neville held his wand at the ready, and more often than not, gripped Harry's right hand to steady him. Harry noticed that with Neville's touch, the charm ate more of his magic than usual, but he didn't mind. They were comrades now, safe in the knowledge that between Voldemort's darkest secrets, the hidden city of the moon, bound by ancient contracts to the lost realm of Atlantis, and everything else unspoken, no one else could trespass on their trust. After what felt like hours of practice, Neville finally spoke. "Harry, I've been sneaking out for extra training whenever I don't have astronomy at night. With that warded circle messing up the castle's usual surveillance, no one's been watching me." Harry looked up from his glowing wand tip. "And what did you discover?" Neville smiled. "Something rather curious. Have you ever noticed Professor Lupin disappearing into the Humping Willow every evening?" Harry's brow shot up. "No, you've seen that?" "Over and over." Neville pointed through the tunnel's narrow arch, where gnarled roots crept along the stone walls. "He slips between the branches like he belongs there. I can't figure out if he's secretly mastered some Celtic tree magic, melding his own form with the wood, or if, somehow, he's the long-lost shepherd of that beast." Harry studied the willow's shadowed shape in his mind's eye, imagining Lupin melding into its branches. That is odd, he admitted, but if anyone could find a way, it'd be Lupin. Neville nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. I plan to watch him some more. Who knows what other secrets he and this castle are hiding? He clapped Harry on the shoulder. Thanks for keeping this between us, Harry. It means more than you know. Harry returned the smile. In that silent, torchlit tunnel, their friendship felt stronger than any spell, and as they left the willow's shadow behind, neither could guess what mysteries awaited them next. The willow's branches trembled as if caught in a sudden gale, though the night air was perfectly still. Neville stepped back, eyes wide. Something, perhaps a brainless magical creature like a goblin, had crept too close, drawn by its own recklessness. Thank you, Neville, Harry said quietly, his voice low and serious. This information is invaluable. He paused, letting the words sink in before he drew a steadying breath and turned away. The next evening, the astronomy tower was bathed in silver moonlight. A crisp chill clung to the stone battlements as Ravenclaw students set up their telescopes to chart Jupiter's shifting bands and sketch its moons onto star maps. A perfect night for stargazing, they all agreed. Harry, however, had other interests. The sky was cloudless and windless, ideal conditions, but his gaze stayed fixed on the scattered golden squares of light far below, flickering in the castle's windows. Through his telescope, he aimed not at Jupiter, but at the humping willow, whose gnarled trunk stood ominously against the lawn. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Ron, sitting beside him, quietly completed the last of Harry's sketches, oblivious to his friend's distraction, until Harry's hand tightened on the telescope's barrel. There, Harry whispered. A flicker of movement passed through the eyepiece, a fleeting shape darting behind the willow's swinging limbs. He nudged the lens with casual precision, then leaned back and pretended to admire Jupiter's cloudy bands. Ron leaned in. You saw it, he breathed, voice barely audible in the cold night. Harry nodded, his face unreadable. Tonight's quiet vigil had just begun. Harry nodded, and a paper crane drifted up into the night sky. 10 minutes later, Sinistra's bell rang, dismissing the Ravenclaws. Bleary-eyed students climbed the steep spiral staircase and vanished into their common room. Under the cover of darkness, two figures slipped away from the dispersing crowd and made their way out of the castle. Harry. From the edge of the trees, Ron burst forward and flung himself around Harry in a bone-crunching hug. The moonlight caught Ron's face and the wild, tangled blaze of his red hair. "Could you keep it down?" came Ginny's voice. She stepped out behind her brother, taller and more slender, her vivid red hair shining like embers. Before Harry could answer, another voice drifted from the shadows. "Harry, are you really meeting Lupin in the Shrieking Shack tonight?" Draco Malfoy emerged, pale as a ghost, his blonde hair shimmering in the moonlight. Standing there together, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Ginny Weasley, and even Draco Malfoy, it was clear that these four, along with the legendary Three Musketeers of Hogwarts and Ron's sister, Ginny, were already the most talked-about students in the castle. Ginny rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Ron, enough with that Three Musketeers nonsense. Since when are you our leader?" Ron shot her a petulant look. "It's just a name, Ginny, and we agreed Harry handles the secret passages." Harry kept walking, shoulders squared. "Right. You all remember how to open the entrance under the humping willow. Only I can press that knot with my scar. No one else can." Ginny crossed her arms. "Or we could just use magic. We're all wizards. Levioso on the root stone, and a simple jinx to pop it open." Ron glanced at her, then back at Harry. "Okay, so if Harry's too precious to touch a tree, Ginny, you cast the spells. Conjure a bat if you like. Anything to get this over with." Late that night, the three of them slipped past the darkened greenhouses, tiptoed through the vegetable garden, and crept across the moonlit lawn. At last they stood before the humping willow, its twisted branches silhouetted against the sky. Ron raised his wand, ready to utter the charm, when Harry stepped forward. "Stand back," Harry warned. He pressed his palm against the knotted root where the entrance lay hidden. At that very moment, a deep, resonant groan rolled out from the trunk. The willow shuddered, and then its branches lashed out like whips, striking Harry with the force of a storm. Ginny's scream died in her throat the moment Harry sauntered forward, ducking under low-hanging branches. He shrugged one shoulder, bent at the waist, leaned back, shifted a half-step to the right, and slipped past them all without a sound. Before Ron, Ginny, or Draco could even blink, Harry had pressed his hand against the swollen scar on the tree's trunk. In an instant, the bark went smooth and pale, as if it had been turned to marble. The trunk ceased all movement. The leaves hung motionless overhead. "I don't think we should waste any more time," Harry said coolly, glancing over his shoulder. Ron rolled his eyes. "You mean you don't want to do all the work yourself for once?" Ginny and Draco exchanged amused looks but said nothing. Together, they stepped up to where the tree's wound had vanished, revealing a hidden seam. With a soft groan, the bark peeled aside like a heavy door, uncovering a tunnel sloping downward. Draco went in first, crouching low, and Ginny followed immediately. Harry slipped through after them, landing on loose earth at the bottom of a short decline. The passage beyond was narrow and dim, barely wide enough for someone to shuffle forward on bent knees. "Are we really going in there?" Ron's voice echoed back from the entrance. At nearly 6 feet tall, he knew he'd have to crawl, if he could even fit, and the faint light ahead did nothing to reassure him that the tunnel had an end. But Ginny's quiet determination gave him no choice. With a resigned sigh, he lowered himself onto all fours and began to wriggle after them into the darkness. Harry led the way into the tunnel, ducking low to squeeze under the stony ceiling. Ginny and Draco pressed in behind him, each step sending a cold drawl, of water down their backs. Ron crawled in last, muttering under his breath, "I really hope we don't run into Lupin down here." 10 minutes crawled by in near darkness. The air grew musty, and the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. Ron whimpered, "Can't we just turn back?" Harry paused and looked back. Even he felt his courage falter. This passage was no ordinary corridor. Its height barely forced them to stoop, and the floor was slick with moss and strange plum blossom-shaped footprints. Harry's recent tracking charm flickered in the gloom, hinting these prints were made by something on all fours. Of course, Lupin in wolf form would slip through here effortlessly, but for a human, it was pure torture. Draco shifted his weight, shoulders curved as if his spine would snap. Ginny's face was pale in the faint torchlight, and Ron's breathing had turned ragged. Harry rubbed a sore spot on his lower back. If they stayed hunched like this much longer, someone was bound to collapse. He stopped dead and turned. "Everyone, hold up." From a pouch at his belt, Harry drew a small vial sealed with a cork. A glowing green potion swirled inside, the liquid bubbling and churning until it glowed with a soft inner light. Ron gasped, "Shrink potion?" Harry nodded, pressing the vial into his free hand. "We're small enough to scoot through without breaking our backs. Ready?" Ginny swallowed hard, Draco gave a stiff nod, and Ron gingerly reached for the cork. One by one, they would shrink, and perhaps at last make it out of this endless wolf-only tunnel in one piece. Chapter 209, Lupin is Found. "When did you get so good at potions?" Ginny demanded, eyes narrowing. "Wait, Aunt Muriel?" Before Ron could answer, Ginny's mind snapped back to her childhood suspicion that her great-aunt had vampire blood. Ron went utterly silent. Draco and Harry, both in on the secret, exchanged guilty glances, and a tense hush fell over the group. Harry finally broke the awkward stillness with a flick of his wand. In an instant, Ginny and Draco, and every speck of their gear, shrank down to the size of fingernails. Their wands, which might have interfered with the charm, had already been deposited safely in Harry's cloak. Then he turned to Ron, who was still recovering from 3 mortifying transformations into a baby, courtesy of a misfired potion earlier that evening. Harry gave him a reassuring grin. "Think of this as protective armor. No more worrying about getting squashed in my pocket." With one deft motion, he plucked the 3 miniaturized Rons, each clinging desperately to his palm, and tucked them into an inside pocket. So prepared, Harry resumed the secret trek toward the shrieking shack, carrying his tiny compatriot safely on his person. "Oops, Draco, your wand just jabbed me in the stomach." Ron's muffled complaint echoed from Harry's coat pocket. "Harry, why can't I slip into the other pocket with Ginny?" Ron grumbled. Harry sighed and glanced down. "Sorry, Ron. We're almost at the top, and Ginny's my girlfriend, so she's got the spare pocket. You and Draco will have to squeeze in together." Draco stiffened but said nothing as Ron shifted, clearly not pleased at the arrangement. Ginny, seated in Harry's other pocket, hid her flushed cheeks behind her hair. She'd never been this close to Harry before, and her cheeks burned as she fidgeted. Ron tried to retort, pushing Draco's wand away in the tight space, but his words died abruptly. Draco's abrupt laugh explained why. What on earth is going on? My rear's pinning Ron's face against the fabric. Harry pressed his hand to his stomach and carefully guided them upward through a twisting conduit of shimmering light. Hold on. Good news. I see daylight ahead. We're nearly there. No sooner had Harry spoken than the tunnel spat them out into a cramped, dusty room. Old crates teetered in one corner, and cobweb-draped tapestries lay rolled against the walls. A narrow window high above let in a thin beam of sunlight, illuminating the swirling motes of dust and signaling that their journey had reached its end. The room was a ruin. Strips of wallpaper hung in tatters, the floor was mottled with stains, every scrap of furniture lay broken as if someone had taken a mallet to it, and the windows were firmly boarded shut. "Quiet," Harry hissed, yanking his wand free and casting a tight silence charm around himself and his three companions. With Lupin's enhanced senses, sharp ears, sharper eyes, they couldn't risk making a sound. "Are we here?" came Ron's muffled voice from Harry's left coat pocket. "Move your—" Draco's voice joined him in protest. "I think we're completely lost, Potter." Harry pressed his wand tip against both pockets. He could feel Ron and Draco twisted together inside, jostling for space, while Ginny, braver, pushed her face against the fabric and then popped out, landing with a soft thud on the grimy floor. "Here," Harry whispered, flicking his wand upward. A hidden vial clipped to his belt sprang open. 3 iridescent drops winked out and pitched onto Ron, Draco, and Ginny. The liquid vanished in a flash of steam, seeping into their skin. Almost instantly, the enchantments that had shrunk their bodies and their clothes faded away. Ron staggered upright to his normal height. Draco straightened his robes, and Ginny shook out her hair, all three blinking at their returned proportions. Harry gave each a brief nod, then lowered his voice even further. "All right, everyone. Back on your feet. Stay close and keep quiet. Let's find out what Lupin's been up to in this dump." He led the way deeper into the wrecked room, wand at the ready, as Ron, Draco, and Ginny fell in step behind him, free of their miniature curse and ready to face whatever lay ahead. Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Draco felt their bodies stretch out absurdly, limbs lengthening like rubber noodles, then snap back into place. In the blink of an eye, they were full size again, standing exactly where they had been before downing the shrinking potion. Ron wiped his brow in disgust. "Ugh!" Ginny crouched, eyes narrowed, scanning the floor. Draco leaned over, studying the smooth stone tiles with intense focus. "Maybe there is something here," Draco murmured at last. "Harry, take a few steps, look for footprints or scuff marks." Harry obliged, striding across the room. He gazed down, but the floor was pristine. "There's nothing. No footprints, no scratches." Draco straightened. "Of course not. Lupin must have used a spell to preserve the dust to hide any trace of movement." He walked over to an old wooden chair tucked in the corner. Gingerly, he sat, and the chair held firm. Yet as he inspected the smooth surface, he noticed something odd. A patch of fresh wood where the dust had been scraped clean, and one of the legs was missing entirely. "It's sturdy enough," Draco said, frowning. "But notice how there's no dust under my seat? He's deliberately swept it away." Harry retrieved his wand from Ron and Ginny. "Good thing we're all still sane. Otherwise I'd have gone mad trying to spot something that isn't there." Ron jabbed his wand at himself, flicking it back and forth. "Honestly, I didn't come all this way just to sniff Malfoy's butt," he muttered, eyes on the dusty floor. Ginny shot Ron a look of exasperation. Draco simply raised an eyebrow, and Harry tucked his wand into his robes. The room lay in eerie silence, every surface deceptively clean, every clue carefully concealed. It would take more than a bit of dust to fool them, but Lupin had certainly tried. In other words, all these dusty chairs and cobwebs only reinforced the idea that no one's lived here in ages. The Shrieking Shack may be Hogsmeade's most notorious landmark, but inside it felt utterly abandoned. Harry swept his gaze across the empty room. "The door to the right is open," Ginny said, lifting her eyes. Her cheeks had settled back to normal, but a faint flush still dusted her ears. They all turned to look. Beyond that door lay a narrow, pitch-black corridor. A cold draft whispered by, and overhead the roof groaned and creaked as if settling, or something moving up there. Ron's face went pale. He swallowed hard. "Let's head upstairs," Harry said, forcing calm. "Someone's bound to be up there." He brushed a cold bead of sweat from his brow, his voice steadier than he felt. The soft hum of Harry's containment charm followed them as they slipped into the hall. The staircase ahead looked ready to collapse, each step more rickety than the last. Dust billowed around their feet as they climbed, the faded carpet smothering their footfalls. At the landing, 4 doors stood in a row, battered and time-worn. From one of them, a slab hanging half open, spilled a pool of warm light and the same slow, persistent creak. The others were sealed tight, but this one beckoned, as if something, or someone, waited just beyond it. "Right there," Harry said, pointing down the hallway. Through the narrow crack in the door, they could just make out a lavish 4-poster bed, the only piece in the room untouched by dust. Heavy curtains hung around its frame, hiding whatever lay within. But through a small tear in the drapery, a flash of black fur revealed that their occupant was far from human, at least not in the usual sense. A long tail thumped against the bedposts, the very sound they had heard echoing through the corridors below. Harry's eyes went wide. Lupin in wolf form, his sense of smell must have betrayed him. Without hesitation, Harry pushed the door open and swept his wand in a sharp conductor-like arc. "Silencio!" he barked. The spell that had bound the beast's sounds snapped, freeing the creature's voice. The curtains shivered, and the shape beneath them stirred. At first, it was a massive black wolf, its muzzle elongated and dark eyes glinting in the dim light. Then fur rippled and receded like a tide pulling back from the shore. Paws drew up into slender human hands. Within moments, the beast stood fully transformed. A man with graying hair and a torn shirt, his chest half exposed, pain etched into his features. His eyes, once lively and warm, were now empty and distant, as if the fierce creature they had just witnessed still lingered within. He stood silent for a long moment. Then at last his hoarse voice cut through the stillness. "Congratulations on finding me, Harry." Lupin ran a hand through his hair, an awkward grin twisting his features. "Honestly, I thought this day might never come." It says Chapter 434, The Final Four. Ron froze in the doorway. "You found us?" Draco's eyes flashed. "When?" "We heard the floorboards creak," Ron confessed. Draco spun toward Lupin, his face tight with anger. Lupin shifted uncomfortably, then gave a hesitant nod. "I promised Tonks I'd be honest with her." Ginny stepped forward. "You don't care for her?" Lupin ran a hand through his hair. "I do, but I panicked. I forgot who I am, that I'm a werewolf, and I forgot this isn't the right moment." A sudden chill swept the room, as if the very walls had grown colder. Draco's voice was low and harsh. "When will be the right time?" Lupin settled his jaw. "We're in the middle of Voldemort's terror. When every goodbye could be your last, when engagements shatter and weddings are put on hold, does any of that change for me?" Hermione frowned. "Is it because Voldemort is about to return?" Lupin's eyes hardened. "Even if he came back tomorrow, so what?" Harry's hand tightened around his wand. "My parents married while on the run from you-know-who." Ginny shook her head. "But you're not a werewolf right now." "Don't mistake my caution for cowardice," Lupin growled. His voice softened just enough to show his pain. "I am a member of the Order of the Phoenix. I face him every day, no matter when or where. I just need time. Time to find the right words for Tonks." Silence fell as they absorbed his confession. Draco's anger melted into something more like concern. Finally, he exhaled and met Lupin's eyes. "Then take that time," he said quietly. "We'll give it to you." Harry's voice cracked as he paced the crowded room. "I've watched too many colleagues vanish. Marlene McKinnon, Benji Fenwick, Edgar Bones, Caradoc Dearborn, even James and Lily." Remus Lupin ran a weary hand through his hair. "Nymphadora is Bellatrix Lestrange's niece. Technically, she's part of the Black family." Harry whirled on him. "Death Eaters don't hesitate to slaughter entire bloodlines. If she isn't with me, then she's one of the Blacks?" Lupin finished quietly, pressing his fingers to his temple. Ron Weasley let out a frustrated growl. "Pure-blood families are all tangled up. My uncles, Gideon and Fabian Prewett, were part of the Sacred 28, and they're both dead." Harry barked a bitter laugh. "So now it's my fault for joining the Order of the Phoenix." Ron's face hardened, his usual grin gone. You might not know this, but Tonks already asked Mad-Eye Moody to let her into the order. Harry stared at him. Ron met his gaze without flinching. And if Moody refuses, I'm going to find that old man and make him. In an instant, Lupin moved as though caught in a vortex. Moments later, he stood fully dressed, wand in hand, his gentle eyes alight with fierce resolve. Moody won't agree, he said quietly. This was Tonks's choice, just as you chose to keep your distance, believing it would keep her safe. Yeah, what reason would I have to interfere with her? Draco asked, shrugging. In what capacity? Remus Lupin groaned, flopping onto the bed and tossing his wand aside. The problem's already been solved, right? When do we expect Voldemort to return? How long will it take? Ron asked, leaning against the doorframe. If it's any time soon, I'll have Fred and George put their plans on hold. Ron glanced around without embarrassment. They're planning to open a shop in Diagon Alley and hire a recent graduate to run it. Lupin managed a tired smile. According to Dumbledore, it won't be for over a year, probably just after the Triwizard Tournament. Draco's head spun with relief and confusion. He hadn't done anything monumental, yet somehow the crisis had passed. Maybe that's why Sirius told us not to worry, he said. Once Tonks officially joins the Order of the Phoenix, Lupin will feel like himself again. Draco paused, then added, I was here too. I helped convince him to come back. Good, Ron said, exhaling. Then the business can go on as planned. From the corner, Ginny buried her face in her hands. I really don't have a brother like you, Seth, he muttered, half exasperated, half amused, as the rest of them finally relaxed. Harry sat forward, eyes bright with suspicion. I don't think the Triwizard Tournament is just a sporting contest anymore. Look at who's coming. Delegates from distant schools, deadly magical creatures. It all feels engineered to help Voldemort rise again. Remus Lupin leaned back in his armchair, hands clasped. You might be right. In fact, Dumbledore and Grindelwald have been in talks about adding a fourth school to the tournament. Harry's heartbeat quickened. A fourth school? Which one? Lupin recited the names offhandedly. Castrubusher, Codestores, the Institute of Magic Vigado, and Ilvermorny's School of Magic. When he said Ilvermorny, Harry emphasized the last word and caught Ron's attention. Ron glanced over, curiosity piqued. If these champions are meant to represent a united front against Voldemort, Harry said quietly, then Ilvermorny is our strongest ally. They've even founded a colony on the moon, Moon City, though very few of their students are aware it exists. Ron scratched the back of his neck. But I thought there were 11 major wizarding schools. Why have we only heard of 9? Lupin shook his head. That's the thing. The other 2 campuses are completely secret. No one knows their names, locations, or when they were established. Harry and Ron exchanged uneasy looks, realizing that the tournament's true purpose and its hidden players were more mysterious and dangerous than they'd imagined. The library in Moon City claimed there was a magic school right here on the moon, and Harry remembered another hidden beneath the waves of Atlantis. It can't be Codestores, Harry said. That's in Russia, completely separate from anything we're looking at. Nor any of the Japanese schools, Ginny added thoughtfully. And what about Ilvermorny? Hermione asked. It was founded by a Slytherin descendant, but its culture is thoroughly American and quite conservative. Then there's Ouagadougou in Africa, Ron pointed out. Their magic is so different, no wands at all, that they're out of the running too. Draco leaned forward, tapping his chin. So if it's not any of the known schools, that leaves only one possibility in South America. Castrubsha. Ginny raised an eyebrow. Why Castrubsh? Because it's hidden deep in Brazil's tropical rainforest, Draco explained. The school is said to occupy a square castle of golden stone, built to look like an ancient temple. Perfect for staying out of sight, not just from muggles, but from other wizards as well. With that, the group exchanged excited glances. If Draco was right, their next adventure would take them straight into the heart of the Amazon. Professor Lupin stood at the front of the room, his tone bright. Castrubsha's castle and grounds are protected by the Cupola Guardians, and its ties to Hogwarts are closer than to any other school. Both institutions use the same concealment charm. To muggles, our castles look like nothing more than piles of crumbling ruins. In fact, Castrubsha's history stretches back almost as far as Hogwarts itself. A ripple of surprise passed through the students. Harry, Ginny, even Draco looked at one another. Lupin's eyes twitched as Ron shot up his hand. "Professor Ginny, have you forgotten Bill?" Ron piped up before Lupin could answer. Ginny frowned. "Forgotten what?" "Bill Weasley was actually pen pals with a student at Castrubshe," Ron announced, puffing out his chest. "That student even invited Bill to join their exchange program so they could meet in person. But since our family couldn't afford the trip, Bill had to turn down the invitation, and apparently that didn't go over well." He paused dramatically. "Bill got cursed by way of a hat and ended up with ears all wrinkled like old parchment." He beamed at Ginny. "See? If you'd kept track of our family's connections the way I do, you'd remember this stuff." Ginny rolled her eyes, and even Draco couldn't suppress a smirk, as Lupin cleared his throat and carried Hut on with the lesson. Chapter 211, Conversation in the Screaming Shack. Chapter 435, Conversation in the Shrieking Shack. "Is this true?" Ginny demanded, her eyes narrowing at her brother. She'd never heard this story before, and Ron had a reputation for making things up just to get attention. He'd boasted about sending a dragon away, only for it to turn out that he, Harry, and Hermione had rescued poached magical creatures. He'd claimed credit for helping Professor McGonagall, when in fact he'd spearheaded the effort to keep Voldemort from seizing the Philosopher's Stone. Ginny wasn't about to let him off the hook this time. Harry and Draco exchanged identical looks of doubt. Ron opened his mouth, then closed it, stammering for words. "That might actually be true," Professor Lupin said, stepping forward and cutting off their view of Ron. "Castrobus does run an exchange program," Lupin explained calmly. "They invite European students to learn about South America's unique flora and fauna. In your 6th year, if you've distinguished yourself academically, or if you know a student at Castrobus who will recommend you, you could receive an invitation." Draco raised an eyebrow and glanced at Ron. "Well, that certainly makes it more plausible," he said. Everyone waited as Ron tried once more to find his voice, the truth of the tale hanging in the air. Ron's brow furrowed in confusion. "Why do you have to be in your 6th year to join this exchange program?" he asked. Professor Lupin gave him a patient look. "Because wherever you go, whether here or abroad, you must hold 2 qualifications, the ordinary wizarding level test certificate and the ultimate wizarding test certificate. You earn them in your 5th and 7th years, respectively." Ron's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" Lupin smiled faintly. "I didn't just blurt it out by accident, you know. I did a bit of asking around." Before Ron could protest, Harry raised his hand. "Do they play Quidditch at that school?" Harry wasn't being shallow. Quidditch in America is quite different from the European game, and he was genuinely curious. Over there, players use a specially modified quaffle that they must pass among teammates and then loft into a small cauldron perched atop each goal ring before it explodes. If the quaffle detonates in your hands, you're forced to withdraw from the match immediately. Once the quaffle sails cleanly through the smallest of the 3 hoops, the scoring team earns a point, and a fresh quaffle is immediately tossed back into play. In North America, there are only 5 renowned club teams split between the United States and Canada. South America, by contrast, is virtually unrepresented. Harry had never even heard of a professional club there, and the Brazilian national squad, in his view, hardly counted. Among dedicated Quidditch fans, only club teams truly carry the sport's spirit. Remus Lupin, who'd often sparred with James Potter over every play and formation, recognized what Harry was asking. He closed his eyes for a moment, drawing on James's stories and memories. "No wonder you've never heard of them," he said at last. "There's only one professional Quidditch club in all of South America, the Tarapoto Treefly, based in Peru." Ron, puffing up like a proud Chudley Cannons fan, chimed in. "Actually, Quidditch didn't really take root in South America until European wizards, members of the International Confederation of Wizards, were stationed in Peru to monitor a pair of nesting viper-toothed dragons. They set up informal matches to pass the time, and the Treefly blossomed from those first makeshift teams." Harry let the information sink in. A single club team, halfway around the world, born out of dragon-watching duty, that felt every bit as exotic as it sounded. Yet somehow, that solitary name, Tarapoto Treefly, now seemed destined to appear again, somewhere down the Quidditch track. Ron leaned back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Don't sulk, Harry. I happen to know more about this than you do. Harry raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? And just how much do you know? More than you think. Ron's chest puffed up. Take Labasio Pollock, for instance, one of the most renowned potion masters in the world, a graduate of Castlebridge, if I'm not mistaken. Harry's smirk deepened. That's nice trivia, Ron, but are you sure you've got the facts straight? Castlebridge? Absolutely, Ron shot back. Besides, have you ever wondered who actually wrote Advanced Potion Making? Harry hesitated. Well, it's our 6th-year potions textbook, isn't it? Exactly. Ron's eyes gleamed. And what about the Asian Anti-Poison Encyclopedia, the reference for 5th-year potions? Its author? Labasio Pollock. Harry fell silent, clearly at a loss. Finally, he shrugged and ruffled Ron's hair. Fair enough. You win this round, Ron grinned. After all, I might only be in my 2nd year, but I know my potion masters. Ginny, standing just behind them, rubbed her ears in disbelief. A 2nd-year Ravenclaw schooling Harry Potter on advanced potions lore? Stranger things had happened at Hogwarts. Have you ever heard of the book A Carnival in a Bottle? Lupin asked abruptly, his face tense as he stared at Harry. Harry shifted in his seat, unnerved. No, wasn't that written by Labasio Polacki? Lupin let out a relieved breath. Yes, exactly, and thank Merlin you haven't read it. He held up a hand as the class leaned forward. Honestly, forget I even brought it up. It's not suitable for your age. He paused, recalling how Lily herself hadn't dared open the first page until after she married James. A ripple of curiosity ran through the students. Lupin cleared his throat, regretting his slip. He knew how children were. The more you tell them not to do something, the more they want to do it. If Harry went looking for that book now, well, Arthur and Molly might be in for a very unexpected surprise. Before anyone could respond, Draco Malfoy spoke up, voice low but eager. That book. My parents have a copy in their bedroom. Murmurs filled the room. Lupin straightened, managing a tight smile. All the more reason to leave it alone. He turned back to the class and began the day's lesson, though a charged silence hung in the air as everyone wondered what secrets lay hidden in those forbidden pages. Well, you'd better brace yourself, Lupin said with a grim smile. Next year's competition won't just involve our usual few champions. Ron's ears pricked up. What do you mean, not just a few competitors? Lupin shifted in his seat. This time, every teacher and every student in the school will take part. The news hit Ron like a blast of cold air. He shot to his feet. All of us? We all have to compete? Draco, ever the composed one, leaned forward. What's the theme of the competition? Exactly, Harry chimed in, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. We'll need to know the subject before we can prepare. Ginny echoed the question. Yes, what's the topic? Lupin nodded. I thought you'd want to analyze the strengths of our rivals. Beauxbatons is renowned for its alchemy. Think of Nicholas Flamel's school. Draco crossed his arms, recalling his father's letters. Durmstrang, on the other hand, specializes in the dark arts. I nearly enrolled there myself, if Mother hadn't refused to let me go so far from home. Harry frowned. That would have suited you, Draco. Draco shrugged. Ginny tilted her head. And Castrumbush? What are they known for? All eyes turned to Lupin. He let out a breath. Castrumbush excels in herbology and magical zoology, so alchemy, dark magic, plant lore, and magical creatures. That's what you're up against. A hush fell over the group as they absorbed the challenge ahead. This was no ordinary school contest. It was a full-scale test of every skill a witch or wizard could learn, and they were determined to emerge victorious. At Castlebush Academy, the students' uniforms are bright green robes, Lupin said hurriedly, eager to divert Harry and the others' thoughts away from that troublesome book. That's it for this chapter. Stay tuned for the next installment, coming soon. Many thanks to everyone for their monthly tickets, recommendations, and subscriptions. Chapter 436, Ryan's Little Move. Harry and Ron followed Lupin into the dormitory, glancing around at the perfectly coordinated 4-poster beds. Every canopy, curtain, and cushion was the exact same shade of green. Just one color? Ron muttered, eyebrows raised. Harry shrugged. It's peaceful, I suppose. Lupin's earlier assurances about Castrumbush had put them at ease. After all, their students specialized in herbology and magical zoology, hardly the dark arts or alchemy. They had barely settled before Harry froze in his tracks. Wait, what's that? He pointed to a softly glowing hearth against the far wall. The fireplace, Ron exclaimed, hurrying forward and instinctively pressing a hand to Harry's forehead. You're burning up. Are you all right? Harry brushed his hand away. No, I'm fine. Lupin, is this connected to the flu network? Draco, loitering by the window, recoiled a step. Lupin smiled wryly. Yes, if you like, we can use it to return the same way we came. Ron frowned. That's hardly public transport. Only the most secure institutions, Hogwarts, the Ministry, keep fireplaces on the flu network, and even they're few and far between. Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm allergic to the flu network, he said quietly. So that's off limits for me. A sudden hush fell over the room as everyone grasped the implication of Harry's simple confession. They'd learned from Fred and George that the fireplace in Lupin's Hogwarts quarters wasn't on the flu network, and that, apart from McGonagall's own hearth, virtually no fireplace was kept alight overnight. Those that were remained under close watch by night guards. Lupin regarded the 4 terrified children with a pleased smile. Now remember, he said softly, I'm Professor Lupin. Ryan scowled. He wasn't pleased at all. Rather than send them home by flu powder, Lupin chose a far more memorable method of return. He handed each of them another vial of shrinking solution. Within seconds, they dwindled to mere inches tall. Then he shifted into his wolf form, towering and powerful, and bounded into the darkness. The sensation was electric, riding the broad back of a 100-foot-long wolf through narrow, winding tunnels. Each leap shook them like a ride on the wildest roller coaster, only darker. Ryan clenched his teeth in regret. If he hadn't revealed his extraordinary talents in front of Harry and the others, he could have pretended to be just another schoolboy and enjoyed the adventure instead of grumbling about it. The next moment, Ryan yelped. He was stretched out across Luna's lap in the Ravenclaw common room, one ear tickled by a loose strand of her silvery hair. He squirmed, rubbing his ear. Luna smiled down at him, her gaze flickering to the small silver rune on her wrist, the magical link that let her share Ryan's memories of Harry and the others' journey. Ryan, she said, why haven't I heard more about Grindelwald? Isn't he supposed to be famous? Ryan settled more comfortably against her thigh, then sat up slightly, as if clearing his throat. There are 2 reasons. First, Grindelwald's ideas are dangerously persuasive, so persuasive that they threaten the existing political order. His slogans are practically sound. It's his follow-through that's weak. He paused, then shot her a wry grin. Second, there's Voldemort. He's the only Dark Lord anyone talks about now. Mention the Dark Lord and people think of him, not Grindelwald. Frankly, most witches and wizards don't even know where Grindelwald came from. Ryan rolled onto his back, and Luna let out a soft oof when he shifted too suddenly. He laughed and lay still, propping his head on her lap. Do you really think Voldemort will return next year? Luna asked, her tone hushed. Ryan's amber eyes glinted with mischief. To the second, precisely 364 days, 2 hours, and 1 second. He flicked his wand casually, and a translucent countdown clock appeared above them, the numbers steadily ticking down. Luna watched it for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Ryan's forehead. Well, she whispered, we'll just have to be ready. Luna leaned back against the ancient chestnut tree lining the castle grounds and watched a single white cloud drift across the sky. Summers come earlier than usual, she observed softly. At Hogwarts, summer really doesn't start until June, and the first week of June means one thing, Ryan replied with a casual shrug. Final exams. Luna frowned. If summer's early, does that push the exams earlier too? Worse, Ryan said, resting one foot on the tree's low root. By this time next year, our exams might not happen at all. Luna blinked. What do you mean? Ryan glanced up at the sky before answering. It's late May now, Thursday. Next Monday, it'll be June. Fast forward to next June, and Tom Riddle has already returned. With Voldemort back in the world, a proper exam timetable seems unlikely. Luna's forehead creased. You're assuming he won't be too busy wrecking everything. Exactly, Ryan interrupted. And if he is busy, that's when Kamen Rider Kronos shows up. Picture it. Voldemort forced out of his own throne room, face to face with his younger self, and with Dumbledore standing by. I doubt Hogwarts would go through with exams under those circumstances. Luna sighed and glanced at Ryan, a mix of pity and amusement in her eyes. So I should be rooting for Voldemort to stick around, at least until our finals are over? Though, I really don't want him around at all. Ryan chuckled and nodded. For most of our classmates, finals are pure agony. But for students at the top of their class, they're a chance to prove ourselves, an essential rite of passage. I'd hate to miss out. They fell silent, each lost in thought. Luna worrying for her friends still struggling with their last lessons, Ryan imagining the chaos of a Dark Lord's return colliding with time-traveling heroes. Summer might have come early, but the real storm was still brewing on the horizon. In the middle of the North Sea, beneath a pitch-black sky, a sinuous bolt of lightning, like a coiling serpent, pierced a crack in the clouds too fine for mortal eyes to see. No sooner had it vanished than a deafening roar ripped through the storm, a sound so fierce it felt as though it could tear the world apart. Far from that raging tempest, in the warm glow of Ravenclaw Tower, a ghostly countdown hovered above the hearth. 394 days, 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 28 seconds. Ryan watched the numbers tick upward and murmured, "So, Voldemort will rise at summer's end, and our exams aren't getting postponed." He exhaled in resigned determination. Exactly what we needed. Meanwhile, in one of Hogwarts' dimly lit corridors, Harry, Ron, and Ginny crept toward the 6th floor, every footstep muffled against the cold stone. Abruptly, Ron froze. Harry turned, voice low. "What is it?" They'd slipped away from Draco and Lupin, trusting Lupin's diversion. He'd convinced Filch that he was busy tending to Mrs. Norris, so the caretaker wouldn't emerge for at least an hour. Ron's face went pale. His hand drifted to his chest. I feel like crying," he whispered, as if he'd just discovered Christmas had been cancelled. Ginny's gaze darted down the corridor. "But what if Filch figures out we're gone? He could smell us or hear us." She pressed her back against the wall and scanned the shadows with fierce vigilance. She didn't want any more point deductions. "Don't worry," Harry muttered. "He's in the caretaker's office," Hermione whispered. "I know," Harry sighed. "I've been there before. Because Mrs. Norris loves fish, the place always reeks of frying fish." "Anyway, we're on the 4th floor now," Ron pointed out, glancing up the empty stairwell. "As far as we can get from the 1st floor. If Filch catches us, I swear—" Harry paused, turned to Ron, "I'll eat your hair." "Hey, is my hair that disgusting?" Ron protested. "Quiet," Harry hissed, holding up a hand. Creeping closer to the wall, he pressed his ear against the cold stone. "Cat's meowing," he breathed. The "so" felt oddly familiar, but there was no time to puzzle it out. "Run!" Harry barked, and the three dashed for the door at the end of the corridor. Last year, a 3-headed dog had guarded that room, but tonight it was empty. Only a pair of yellow eyes flashed in the darkness. "Lumos!" came a sharp command. A beam of light swept down the hallway. Filch's voice followed, clipped and triumphant. "It's a pity, Harry Potter, that we meet again under such inconvenient circumstances." The caretaker stepped forward, wand raised, and Mrs. Norris padded silently at his heels, her glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. Ryan smiled triumphantly as he reached down to stroke Jerry, his plump tabby who just leapt onto his stomach with a satisfied purr. "Well done, Jerry," he murmured, running his fingers along the cat's soft fur. Then, looking out at his readers, he added with genuine gratitude, "Thank you to Zhuwu Changliang for the monthly ticket, and thanks to all my classmates for your recommendations and subscriptions." Chapter 213, Course Selection. The next morning, the Ravenclaw students awoke to a startling sight. In the far corner of the Great Hall sat their house hourglass, its lower chamber, usually brimming with glittering sapphires, now nearly half empty. Although Ravenclaw still led all 4 houses in points, Slytherin's Emerald count had swollen so dramatically that it had almost caught up. Rumors quickly spread about who was responsible: Harry Potter, his girlfriend Ginny Weasley, and Ron Weasley. To everyone's surprise, the Ravenclaws offered no protest. It wasn't simply Harry's influence around Hogwarts, nor was it a sign that Ravenclaws didn't care about house points. The real reason lay in a curious change at the castle's end-of-day routine. Since Argus Filch's bizarre transformation into a wolf wizard, his nightly patrols had resumed almost as a formality. So long as students avoided his gaze, the danger of being caught seemed to vanish. His erratic appearances only emboldened the pupils. Even those who normally stayed indoors after dusk now slipped through shadowy corridors, eager for the thrill of moonlit mischief. And so, when Harry, Ginny, and Ron made their late-night move against Slytherin's hourglass, few could muster indignation, and many were quietly delighted by the audacious stunt. One by one, students were caught in the act and penalized, house points stripped away in droves. The biggest losers? Gryffindor and Slytherin. Gryffindors fell victim to their own daredevil streaks, while the pureblood-proud Slytherins refused to tolerate any spectacle from lesser folk, be it squibs or werewolves, especially after last week's absurd stunt hit the front page of the Prophet. After all, Hogwarts has long known about squibs, lycanthropes, even the whispered legend of Fenrir's avatar, but it was Argus Filch's obvious squib status that truly stoked their indignation. Meanwhile, Harry's recent exploits became the latest craze, the entire student body clamoring to try the same daring feats. Predictably, the house tally plunged to historically low figures. Gryffindor, 17 points. Hufflepuff, 35 points. Slytherin, 49 points. Ravenclaw, 58 points. Never before in Hogwarts history have the standings looked so bleak. The four heads of house have all but given up on the points race this year. And though final exams are still weeks away, Ravenclaw has already clinched the Quidditch Championship Cup. Even if Ravenclaw had surrendered every last point they'd earned from the Championship Cup, they might still edge out the competition for the House Cup. But Harry and his friends barely gave the standings a second thought. Their minds were on something else entirely: course selection. Normally, students chose their third-year electives before the Easter holiday in March. This year, however, everything had been pushed back to today. And since it was Friday, the last day of formal classes before the June exams, second years were free to roam the castle, debating which subjects to sign up for in their third year. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had gathered in the Great Hall alongside Draco Malfoy. As usual, Pansy Parkinson sat at Malfoy's side, but Crabbe and Goyle were conspicuously absent from the Ravenclaw table. Draco had already declared that whatever electives he picked, his companions would follow suit. No questions asked. Not far away, Hermione, exasperated that Luna Lovegood was off in class and couldn't lend a hand, turned to Ryan. "Why can't we browse all the options, like the older students do?" she demanded. Ryan, the very same second year whose exploits with a confiscated time-turner had made the Ministry think twice before using one again, frowned. "Relax," he said. "The courses on our list are the compulsory ones. We don't have a choice there. As for divination, well, it's all about raw talent. You'd be wasting your time." Hermione huffed, but before she could argue, the swish and swirl of robes signaled the approach of Professor McGonagall, who came ready to administer the course selection forms. The real decision-making had begun. Hermione stood before the course selection parchment, quill poised over her list. "Divination only admits a handful of students each year," she reminded Harry. "You don't have to choose it, and Muggle Studies, its curriculum, is centuries out of date. Professor Riddle's Defense Against the Dark Arts alone covers everything you'd learn there. As for ancient runes, that's indispensable if you want to master magic instead of just using it. Even Hagrid's worst class on magical creatures can't be dull for long, and you learn a lot." Harry nodded thoughtfully. In the original timeline, Hagrid's care of magical creatures lessons had become monotonous in Harry's fourth year, mostly because Hagrid was busy breeding new specimens for the Triwizard Tournament. And, frankly, exploding-tailed Scroots were a one-note spectacle. Hermione tapped 3 courses off her parchment with a cheerful flick of her quill. "All right, so I won't take the 3 you mentioned," she said, glancing up with a reassuring smile. Harry straightened. "I've decided, too. I won't take divination, arithmancy, or Muggle studies." Ron's jaw dropped. "Wait, you listened to Ryan, didn't you?" "Harry, you have a real knack for prophecy," Ron protested, rolling his eyes. "You really should stick with divination." Harry shrugged, his expression calm. "I appreciate the suggestion, Ron, but I think my time will be better spent elsewhere." The 3 friends exchanged glances as Hermione tucked her quill behind her ear. With their decisions made, they moved on to weigh the rest of their options and the upcoming term's adventures. "Besides," Draco continued in his precise, clipped tones, "you really should enroll in Muggle studies." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Draco folded his arms. Muggle-born students always take it. It boosts their OWL results. And if you're aiming for top marks on your NETs, a solid grounding in the Muggle world can only help. In the long run, the future of the wizarding community depends on understanding non-magic society. Ron sat up straight. He's got a point, he said. When you finish school and start hunting for a job, your transcript makes all the difference. If you want a job dealing with Muggles and you've never taken Muggle studies, you'll be at a real disadvantage, even if you know Muggles better than most people. You've no official proof of your expertise. Harry tapped his chin, counting courses on his fingers. But I can only take 12. I'm already signed up for arithmancy. If I add Muggle studies, something has to go. Well, Ron groaned, I'm not signing up for 10 classes. That's ridiculous. Harry sighed. Fine, I'll drop one. Either arithmancy or Muggle studies. Help me decide. Ron, with a theatrical flourish of his wand, closed his eyes and jabbed at the course list. He opened his eyes. Divination, he declared. Harry blinked. No, I need divination. Lavender and I promised we'd share a class. Ron scowled. Then I suppose I'll be the one ditching it. I don't want Muggle studies either, Ron muttered, crossing his arms. Arithmancy? Draco Malfoy offered with a faint smirk. He flicked a glance at Harry. Ron paused, thinking of Lavender. She had to choose something, and if she picked arithmancy, he might as well join Harry, and at least he'd avoid ancient runes. He exhaled. Fine, I'll take arithmancy too, just like Harry. Draco shrugged. Better to stick with the others. Besides, Muggle's studies at Hogwarts wasn't exactly first-rate. He'd heard enough of Mr. Weasley's ramblings to know self-taught was more his style than a half-baked curriculum. You don't have to do arithmancy, Seamus Finnegan called from the Gryffindor table. He swiveled in his seat, eyebrows raised. Lavender and Ernie Macmillan got into it during herbology today. A fight? Ron asked. Not exactly, Seamus said, shaking his head. A debate, divination versus arithmancy. Lavender's fiercely loyal to Professor Trelawney. She and Parvati practically camp out in the divination classroom whenever they get a spare minute. Dean, Thomas leaned over. Don't expect Lavender to pick arithmancy, then. Ron glanced at Harry, then Draco. All right, he sighed. Arithmancy it is. His father's friend, Daedalus Diggle, just happens to be a member of the Order of the Phoenix. That's brilliant. I don't have to drop ancient runes, Ron exclaimed, letting out a huge, relieved sigh. Around him, his classmates exchanged puzzled glances. Dean and Seamus, who had just been mocking the idea of taking runes, suddenly looked sheepish. As it turned out, ancient runes would indeed welcome students, just like Ron. Chapter 214, Examination at Hogwarts. You'll never find a market for magical comforts like air conditioners or enchanted fans. Every June, the school closes for the summer holidays. It wasn't until Ryan, recalling Harry Potter from his previous life, reread the series in this new world that he realized why cooling spells and gadgets never appear in the books. But there's no time for such reflections today. It's June 1st, and exams have already begun. Harry still feels as if he's dreaming. Just yesterday, he was agonizing over which electives to choose. Now he's staring down his first set of tests. His only relief is that, despite the official start of summer, the weather has been unusually mild. He needn't endure the sweltering, steam-filled classrooms that turned last year's exams into a trial by heat. Their first exam is in charms. After completing a written paper in the main hall, each student faces a practical demonstration. One by one, Professor Flitwick calls them forward and instructs them to cast the universal breaking charm on a notoriously noisy candy. For Harry, silencing the little contraption with a perfectly formed charm is almost second nature. He steps up confidently, wand at the ready, and that afternoon's exam was Transfiguration. For the practical portion, Professor McGonagall presided as each student transformed a rabbit into a pair of slippers. The more lifelike the result, the higher the score. Any flaw meant points lost. She judged each submission on 3 criteria: visual accuracy, texture under the hand, and the slipper's reaction when subjected to a scent test. Unfortunately for Ron, his slippers turned out to be highly pepper-sensitive. One sniff and they began sneezing, which promptly set Ron off in a flurry of a coup. Needless to say, his grade suffered. Their next test, Potions, was scheduled for first thing the following morning. Everyone trudged in bleary-eyed, stifling yawns until Professor Snape swept through the door. The moment he entered, the room snapped alert. Despite himself, Ron felt a jolt of energy, enough to rouse any drowsy mind. The assignment was to brew the swelling solution, a notoriously precise concoction. After the exam, the trio made their way to the Great Hall for lunch. Midway through carving his roast beef, Ron sat bolt upright. "Hang on. Harry, would you mind going over the steps with me? I keep feeling like I've left something out." Harry put down his fork and recited from memory. 1. Take 2 level tablespoons of dried nettles and add them to a clean mortar. Then grind in 3 pufferfish eyes until you have a medium-fine powder. 2. Transfer 2 measures of that powder into a crucible. Heat it at a moderate flame for 20 seconds, then wave your wand in a sweeping figure 8 and maintain the heat for exactly 60 minutes. 3. Add 1 measure of bat spleen to the crucible, stir 4 times counterclockwise, heat gently for 30 seconds, then flick your wand, and the swelling potion is complete. Harry shrugged. Pretty straightforward. The finished brew should be a pale, translucent blue. Heads turned at his voice, eyes bright with admiration. Ron, however, had lost interest in his half-eaten steak. He leaned forward on the table and winced as though some invisible force were tugging at his skin. "Careful you don't overdo it," Harry added. "Too much bat spleen, and this potion won't just swell you up, it'll irritate you badly." Ron rubbed his knuckles. "You've got to remember," Harry continued, "the whole point of a swelling potion is that anything it touches will balloon. Some married wizards dilute it first. Trust me, you do not want to find out what happens if they don't." Ron shuddered, as if he could already feel his fingers expanding to twice their size. By the time the bell rang for afternoon classes, the eerie tingling had faded, but the odd sensation stayed with them both. Next up, their 4th exam of the day, and it was herbology. Today's challenge, handling the viciously venomous tentacula vines. Professor S. Prout paced between the rows of desks. "All right, what does a poisonous tentacle look like?" Harry wrote without hesitation. "They're covered in red spines and have a small mouth at the tip. In fully mature specimens, snake-like fangs will grow from those mouths." "Describe its behavior," she continued. "The vines are mobile," Harry explained. "They lash out at any nearby creature, injecting venom through their spines to paralyze prey. Once the fangs develop, they can also deliver a far deadlier toxin." "And how do they tackle larger animals?" "With full-grown fangs," Harry finished. "They can extend those snake-like teeth and inject a lethal dose of venom." That was Harry's written exam in a nutshell. But when the practical portion began, he knew they weren't going to collect and grade his answers. Instead, each student was handed a small basin and told to transfer a batch of immature fangless tentacles into it, by hand. By the time it was over, even Neville, herbology's usual star pupil, was ashen and bleeding from dozens of shallow scratches. And as for Ryan, always so neat and meticulous in everything else, Harry was fairly certain there was nothing ordinary about him. But the most astonishing thing of all, in Harry's eyes, was how the tentacle's venom numbed you so thoroughly that you hardly noticed the pain, even when the spines jabbed you repeatedly. Harry's fist landed squarely on Ron's shoulder, part of a defensive drill, he reminded himself, and Ron let out a startled snarl. Ron shot Harry a glare. "Test? Really, Harry?" Harry rubbed his knuckles. "Sorry, just needed to see if you could take a hit." Ron shook out his arm. "You'd think giants would have the same problem, except they brew wine from the juice of their poisonous tentacles. They already love to batter each other. Now that they're supposedly pain-proof, they've only gotten more brutal." Harry gave a rueful shrug while keeping an eye on the clock. Nearly time for their last exam of the second-year finals. Once they finished today, they'd have a week and 4 days to do whatever they liked. "Defense against the dark arts," Harry muttered. "Our 5th and final test." They headed toward the empty chamber next door to Professor Lockhart's classroom. When Harry pushed open the door, his jaw dropped. From the outside, it looked like a cramped, nondescript storeroom, but the moment Harry stepped inside, he realized why. The entire room was under an extension charm, so flawless you'd never guess the true dimensions. Wooden partitions, painted bright white, formed a series of narrow corridors that stretched on and on into the distance. At the far end of this maze stood a single metal prosthetic hand, mounted on a polished plinth. Clutched in its fingers was a sleek metal wand, shaped unmistakably like a gun. Harry swallowed. This was going to be an exam unlike any other. Professor Riddle stood by the makeshift podium at the far end of the corridor, his dark eyes sweeping over the students. "You'll have noticed that I scheduled the practical portion of this course first," he began crisply. "Today's examination. Using everything you've learned in defense against the dark arts, you must defend yourselves against incoming projectiles." He held up a sleek metal wand. "These fire small, blunt metal slugs, painful, yes, but incapable of serious harm. Now, put on your protective robes. They'll automatically record each time you're struck." He inclined his head once. "Begin." At his signal, the corridor erupted into a flurry of sparks and flying metal. Students darted behind partitions, unleashed shields and jinxes, but the barrage was relentless. 10 minutes later, the exhausted pupils streamed out of the corridor, their once pristine robes covered in silver impact marks. Harry Potter emerged first, still gripping his wand. He glared down at the single, blinking mark on his chest. "That was impossible," he muttered. "If I hadn't been stuck behind that wooden barricade, I might have dodged more of them." But the robe's recording enchantment didn't lie. Harry had bay. Ian hit a fair number of times. Ron Weasley followed, shoulders slumped, his robe festooned with spots. "I thought I was doing all right," he groaned. "Turns out all right still means getting peppered from head to toe." Harry gave him a sympathetic look, only to realize they had no time to recover. Waiting directly after this practical test was their final written exam, History of Magic. The pace of their schedule left barely a moment to catch their breath. As they trudged toward the next classroom, every student felt the weight of one more challenge bearing down on them. The classroom buzzed with hushed whispers as Harry and his friends settled into their cramped desks. Because time was so tight, Professor Riddle, acting as invigilator, handed each student 2 exam papers at once and gave them leave to tackle History of Magic first. The plan was to collect both papers together when the session ended. With fresh quills in hand, Harry prepared to switch gears after the morning's demanding Defense Against the Dark Arts practical. He began with History of Magic. The first question read, "Describe the Medieval European Wizards Conference." Harry wrote confidently. Hosted by the learned Wiley, this gathering focused on standardizing broom-flying techniques across the continent. The next prompt asked about the International Wizarding Conference of 1289. Harry answered, "Delegates convened to discuss straightforward yet effective methods for occupying a country and then gradually revealing the wizarding community to its inhabitants." In barely 20 minutes, his quill had danced across the page, filling every line. Harry leaned back and set down his pen. The exams were over. Both papers would be collected together in a few moments. Already his mind was racing ahead to Saturday's Quidditch final, where he'd face Dudley once more. Despite the tension in the room, Harry couldn't suppress a grin. There was nothing he loved more than a good match. Chapter 439, The Quidditch Final. The stands fell deathly silent as the game took an unexpected turn. Lee Jordan's excited commentary rang out across the pitch. "Absolutely bonkers. Is this even Quidditch anymore?" he shouted into his microphone. "Hufflepuff's chasers have abandoned their usual positions, and all 4 bludger beaters have zeroed in on one player, Harry Potter." He paused for breath, then carried on in astonishment. "Ravenclaw's doing the same thing. Their beaters, and even the other chasers, are chasing Potter relentlessly. Meanwhile, they're having the quaffle straight at Hufflepuff's hoops, right behind Dudley, of all people." Down on the field, Harry weaved through a gauntlet of speeding bludgers, his Nimbus 2000 shuddering under each brutal hit. Below him, Dudley Dursley, Hufflepuff's unlikely hero turned goalkeeper, stretched every inch of his long arms to bat away the barrage of quaffles that came hurtling toward the hoops. The 2 rivals circled one another like prize-fighters, neither giving an inch. Professor McGonagall, usually the embodiment of composed authority, was at the edge of her seat. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, her eyes wide behind her spectacles. Next to her, Professor Flitwick, speechless for once, leaned forward, utterly captivated. Even Madame Hooch, who had officiated countless matches, looked ready to intervene on the pitch herself. McGonagall finally blurted, "This is not regulation Quidditch. It's..." It's sheer chaos! And yet, she could not tear her eyes away. As a former chaser for Gryffindor, she'd watched every match she could, but never had she witnessed such a spectacle. Players abandoning their own scoring chances to hound the Seeker, while the Quaffle pinged off goal hoops in wild, improbable ricochets. The entire field had become a swirling dance of risk and daring, pushing both teams and their bodies far beyond anything recorded in the Quidditch annals. High above, Harry spotted the snitch flickering gold behind Dudley's right shoulder. Propelled by adrenaline and the roar of the crowd, he dove at it. But in that same instant, a well-aimed bludger from a Hufflepuff beater cracked against his arm, sending him spiraling. Dudley seized the moment. He flung his arms wide, deflecting a quaffle that might have been a perfect score. The crowd inhaled in unison as the ball clanged off the post and dropped between his legs. Slowly, deliberately, Dudley rose onto his broom, quaffle in hand. He glanced up at Harry, finally emerging from the bludger attack, and then pivoted to sweep the ball skyward. It sailed in a perfect arc toward the highest hoop. Lee Jordan's voice exploded once more. Goal! Dudley Dursley scores for Hufflepuff. The stadium erupted, but McGonagall simply closed her eyes and shook her head, smiling in disbelief. Today's match had shattered every expectation of Quidditch, and in doing so, had reminded everyone why they loved the game. Surrounded by opponents and under relentless attack from two speeding bludgers, Harry Potter rode like a swallow in a storm, unyielding, fluid, almost beyond belief. In his hands, the Nimbus 2001, the fastest broom in the world, if only by the slimmest of margins, was transformed into an instrument of sheer sorcery. A single, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, a slightest tilt of the handlebars, and Harry slipped through the paths of three bludgers converging on him at once. It was as though he had eyes in the back of his head. With nothing more than a gentle shake to the left, he let one bludger thunder harmlessly past. Behind him, Hufflepuff's Seeker, Cedric Diggory, strained every muscle just to keep pace, both boys racing toward the same glittering target, the Golden Snitch. But while the Seekers dueled in the upper reaches, a very different spectacle was unfolding beneath them. Hufflepuff's keeper, Dudley, planted himself in front of the hoops like an unshakable bulwark. Though his movements were awkward, sometimes downright clumsy, each awkward save was astonishingly precise. Quaffles rocketed at him as though launched from a cannon, only to sputter out the instant they landed in his gloves. He didn't flinch or sway. He stood like an iron tower, swallowing every shot with grim determination. Ravenclaw's chaser, Davis, has caught the quaffle. Oh, but Dudley stops it again. The commentator's voice crackled with amazement over the loudspeakers. From end to end of the pitch, extraordinary feats were rewriting expectations. Harry weaving through chaos in the air, for Dudley defying every rule on the ground, and still the snitch eluded them both. Hufflepuff's Seeker, Cedric Diggory, suddenly shot forward, and the rest of the Hufflepuff chasers swarmed in to surround Harry. A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Then, with a blur of motion, Harry swooped in through their blind spot and snatched the Golden Snitch. Snitch caught. Ravenclaw wins 150-0, the announcer boomed. The stands exploded in cheers. Even the crestfallen Hufflepuff fans were on their feet, applauding. Unbelievable, someone marveled. I've never seen a keeper and seeker work so perfectly together. Even Crumb, another voice began. Can't compare, a third added. And between us, Crumb's got serious charisma. High in the stands, Ryan clenched his fists in irritation. He'd come to the final on his own. No Luna, no Penelope, no one else. This match was too important. After all, his creation, Harry Potter, had undergone a remarkable transformation. His bloodline had turned a silvery white, marking him as truly unique. Dudley Dursley? He could barely claim that as one of Ryan's works. This final represented the first true showdown between his characters, and Ryan was determined to watch every moment. What he hadn't expected was to find some of the greatest witches and wizards in the world seated around him. With the Triwizard Tournament looming on the horizon, the students of Hogwarts were buzzing at the prospect of other magical schools joining the fray. Just one more sign that the wizarding world was about to change forever. Chapter X, The Whisper Campaign. By now, word of Harry Potter had spread through all 4 schools, and even the most prestigious students were buzzing with opinions. Some of the so-called elites were convinced that the four enchanting monks were superior in every way, and Trum, of course, still carried the prestige of a World Cup Quidditch star. If Harry seemed half as solid as he had in the original timeline, you can be sure they'd already set up amplification charms to drown out any favorable comparisons, and scoff that it was all just showmanship. Ryan, however, was not the type to swallow his indignation. He had a plan. When Entertainment Week began next Monday, those self-important snobs who had sneered at Harry wouldn't know what hit them. Ryan grinned, imagining each one caught in an unforeseen embarrassment, soon to be on full display for the entire school. But that wasn't all Ryan had noticed. A few of the Slytherins sitting nearby gave off a faint, unmistakable werewolf scent, which was odd, since none of them were supposed to be animagi or lycanthropes. Alongside them were Flint and his graduating friends, the same students who'd never set foot on the Quidditch pitch again. When the announcement came that Harry Potter would be their guest of honor, the entire group rose and applauded. Ryan watched their faces as they clapped. There was a coldness there, an edge. They weren't cheering for Harry. They were waiting for him to falter. And when he did, they'd be ready to pounce. They're practically laying the groundwork for next year's Quidditch championship, arming themselves with werewolf players as their secret weapon. Ever since Harry demonstrated just how crucial peak physical conditioning can be on the pitch, the wizarding world has been obsessed with strength and speed. A handful of athletes have already been transformed into werewolves, and word is they'll soon train Slytherin's own Fenrir incarnation in the same way, hoping to reproduce Harry's uncanny edge. Ryan shook his head in dismay. This won't remain an isolated experiment. If the Quidditch World Cup committee doesn't act soon, every major team will field werewolf wizards before long. After all, it was only natural that, in the original timeline, every squad upgraded to firebolts. Innovation spreads fast in Quidditch. Meanwhile, Harry stood looking up at the packed stands and felt a thrill of disbelief. He'd never been so popular. Even the Slytherins who'd once despised him were cheering his name. Hagrid, torch held high above his head, parted the four-colored sea of spectators, and through the gap came Ginny, rushing forward to throw her arms around him. The flame atop Harry's head, his little fire spirit Hephaestus, morphed into a pair of gentle arms and enfolded him in an intimate embrace. The warmth, laced with a thrilling heat that never actually singed his skin, felt absolutely exquisite. Across the pitch, Ron and Draco each had one arm wrapped around their girlfriends, waving enthusiastically. Neville stood a bit off to the side with the rest of the Gryffindors, grinning at Harry with unabashed pride. Nearby, Anthony Goldstein, Terry Boot, and Michael Corner hoisted a massive banner into the air. It bore a dazzling, painted silhouette of Harry, its painted counterpart waving back at the crowd. Below the image, golden letters read, "Harry Potter, greatest seeker ever." Seamus Finnegan stepped forward and tossed a bouquet of flowers skyward. With a soft pop, petals fluttered down like scented confetti. Up in the air, Fred and George Weasley reappeared on their flying recliner chairs, hawking smoke bombs and the latest of their ingenious little gadgets to delighted onlookers. Amidst cheers and applause, Harry slipped his hand into Ginny's. Together, they walked toward the stands, where Professor Dumbledore waited, cradling the gleaming Quidditch cup. He beamed at Harry and said in that familiar, cryptic tone, one only he and Grindelwald might fully appreciate, "Youth is so beautiful, isn't it? Like a glass of mellow gin." Then, with a nod and a proud smile, Dumbledore handed Harry the trophy, and the stadium erupted into triumph once more. "I'd be happy to help polish your chapter. Could you please paste the text you'd like me to revise?" Chapter 216, News of an Engagement. Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Draco had retreated to the small room at the end of the fourth-floor corridor to escape the post-match throng. Yet the quiet refuge felt oddly tense. None of them were nearly as elated as they'd been on the Quidditch pitch. Heads hung low, they stared at the scuffed floorboards. Ron and Ginny sat with their backs to one another, sulking. It all went back to one conversation. 10 minutes had passed since the final whistle. Lavender Brown had been whisked away by Professor Trelawney and Parvati Patil, leaving Ron to stew in his own frustration. Ever since Dumbledore's decree last year had made this dusty chamber off-limits, it had become a favored hideaway. After lunch, the four of them, Harry, Ron, Ginny, and the temporarily untagged Draco, had filled it with a pot of iced pumpkin juice, chocolate frogs, licorice wands, and other confectionery comforts. Yet for some inexplicable reason, Ron was positively radiant. He leaned back against the wall, clasping his hands as if clutching a trophy. "Ha ha," he crowed. "I finally got closer to Lavender. Thanks for the assist, Harry." Harry stared at him, speechless. He lifted the goblet of pumpkin juice to his lips and let the icy liquid calm his irritation. Why was Ron thanking him? More to the point, why was Ginny sitting there, glaring at her brother instead of celebrating her victory? Ginny's cheeks flamed as she glowered at Ron over her shoulder, arms folded tight. "Oh, spare me, Ron," she muttered. "Your victory hardly merits a fanfare." Ron's grin slipped, replaced by a pout that made him look half-grown child, half-entitled champion. "It is a big deal, Gin," he insisted. "Lavender actually talked to me without blinking twice." Ginny rolled her eyes so hard they nearly made a noise. Harry set his goblet down and stood, stretching as if to signal the end of this awkward pause. "All right, you two," he said, voice calm but firm. "Game's over. Can we please move on?" Draco, lounging in the corner, smirked. "Yes, let the lovebirds, or whatever this is, get back to their starring roles." Ron flared. Ginny huffed. Harry poured himself another glass of pumpkin juice, and in the hush that followed, each of them settled back into the familiar rhythm of rivalry and teased affection that characterized life in Hogwarts, where even a simple afternoon snack could feel like the most momentous affair of all. Ron Weasley could barely keep his eyes on the Quidditch pitch. He turned to Draco Malfoy, who was sitting a few rows up in the stands. "One thing's driving me mad," he growled. "Professor Trelawney, who never leaves her tower, actually showed up to watch today's match." Draco raised an eyebrow. "And? She and Parvati Patil wouldn't stop staring at me." Draco smirked. "Why didn't Parvati sit with her twin sister Padma? She could have gossiped with her instead of oogling you." Ron scowled. "If she had, Lavender and I could have sat even closer together." Beside him, Ginny grimaced. "Ron, please, can we talk about something else?" Ignoring his sister, Ron clenched his fists. "It's Trelawney's fault. I just know she said something horrible about me already." Draco laughed softly. "You only chose divination to fill out your timetable. If you hadn't, you'd have just 9 classes next year." "You're a despicable hypocrite," Ron shot back, standing abruptly, always pointing fingers at me and Harry. Draco rose as well, cold amusement in his eyes. "Oh, and you're any better?" "Yes," Ron barked. "Like when Lavender tried to edge away from you, but you still refused to let go. Absolutely disgusting." Ginny stood, her cheeks flushing with both anger and exasperation. "You know what, Ron? I actually think Professor Trelawney and Parvati were right to be suspicious. They must have guessed there's something going on between you and Lavender. And honestly, I'd suspect it too." She crossed her arms and fixed her brother with a hard stare. "It suits you perfectly. Parvati and Professor Trelawney had just pulled the same stunt that Ron once tried on Harry and me. At least that's how Harry saw it." He shot Ginny a quick, secret wink and a carefully placed thumbs up. Meanwhile, Draco was physically holding Ron back as the younger boy lunged forward toward Ginny. Ever since, the two had been locked in an almost comical Cold War. A faint rustling overhead caught Harry's attention, a soft fluttering, like an owl's wings beating through the night air. The sound drifted closer until at last Hedwig swooped down. "Hedwig!" Harry exhaled in relief as the snowy owl alighted on his outstretched arm. She nipped gently at his fingers, then bobbed her head until Harry reached for the small scroll tied to her leg. Unfurling the parchment, he read, "Dear Harry, you could not be a more fitting heir to James. You and your friends uncovered the secret of the Shrieking Shack, just as we did in our youth. And discovering you can ride on Remus while under the shrinking potion, that was pure genius. Back then, we only had our animagi forms to navigate the tunnels. Rest assured, Remus and Tonks are reunited and happier than ever. There's no need for you to worry about them. You also seem to know that Voldemort will return next year. I'm still not sure how you figured that out, but it won't interfere with our plans. If anything, his resurrection makes our upcoming celebration all the more vital. We intend to fill the world with love. With all my best, your friend. Harry felt his throat go suddenly dry as he read the letter again, and Ginny's eyes blazed with excitement. Ron, on the other hand, stood beside them, arms folded, cheeks flushed with anger. From behind Ron, Draco Malfoy's low, mocking chuckle drifted across the room. The parchment read, "My dear Harry, it's time to hold the engagement feast that should have taken place long ago, your engagement party with Ginny. The date is set for June 21st. I've spoken with Professor Dumbledore, who confirms that your magical abilities have fully stabilized. You're no longer required to return to the Dursleys. If you can, please arrive on your own. Love, Sirius Black." Ginny let out a squeal and turned to Harry, practically bouncing on her toes. "Harry, did you see that? We're getting engaged, just like Draco and Pansy." 2 weeks and 2 days from now, Harry reminded her gently, trying to steady his racing heart. Ginny threw her arms around him. "Isn't it wonderful?" Harry managed a small smile. "Ginny, you're still—" "I know I'm young," she cut in, rolling her eyes, "but Professor Trelawney and Parvati think Lavender's only 17, yet they said her engagement was fine. Why is ours any different?" Before Harry could answer, Ron exploded. His red hair seemed to stand on end as he stomped toward them. "I won't allow it," he shouted. "Ginny, you're my sister. You're far too young to be getting engaged. You should find someone more reliable, someone like me. Harry's a nice enough bloke, but he's still a kid." Ginny squared her shoulders and met Ron's furious gaze. "I've made my choice, Ron. Harry's the one I want." She turned back to Harry, her smile unwavering. "I love him, and I can't wait for June 21st. Draco's laughter rang out again, high and sharp. "Well, isn't this entertaining? The Weasley clan in uproar over an engagement." He strode past Ron and Ginny, tossing his blonde hair. "I'd mark your calendars if I were you. This should be a very memorable party." Ron's face went a deeper shade of red, but Ginny simply looped her arm through Harry's and beamed at him. Harry squeezed her hand, feeling both terrified and thrilled. The countdown to their engagement feast had begun, and nothing would stop it now. "Draco, you're supposed to be our judge." Ginny's voice rang out across the courtyard as she and Ron glared at Draco, who was leaning casually against a stone balustrade, watching the scene unfold. "And since you're engaged to Ginny," Ron added, "you should be the one to convince Harry and the others." Draco let out a soft chuckle. "Hold on. Engaged means Mrs. and Mr. Weasley gave their blessing, doesn't it?" Ginny's cheeks colored, but she nodded. "They did." Draco turned to Ron, his tone matter-of-fact. "Same with Sirius. All the adults have agreed, and if Harry and Ginny want this engagement, Ron, you should really back off." Ron bristled. "And what if Harry doesn't want it?" "Oh, he does," Draco replied easily. "I've noticed he's been up at dawn watching Cho Chang, Ravenclaw's third-year chaser, train every morning. And have you heard him address the Ravenclaw ghost as Helena?" Ron's jaw tightened. "So?" Draco's pale eyes glittered with mischief. "So, ghosts are evolving. Who's to say they won't one day live among us, maybe even have children with humans? Just look at Moaning Myrtle. If we're talking long-term prospects, perhaps you should consider whether Harry's really ready to settle down so early." A chill passed over Ron's expression as he looked at Harry, not as his best friend, but as someone he suddenly distrusted. The bond they'd shared seemed to shift in that moment, revealing an unexpected rift between them. Ginny's voice rang out across the courtyard. "Harry!" She hurried over to him, concern etched on her face. Sweat dampened his forehead and soaked through his robes. He blinked up at her. "Have you forgotten again?" She folded her arms. "I've told you a dozen times why you have to be up at 6 every morning, and don't pretend you don't know about the side effects." Harry ran a hand through his hair. "Side effects? Honestly, Ginny, I feel like I'm chasing my own shadow." He glared at her in mock accusation. "And Ms. Grey might as well be my great-grandmother for all the sense your schedule makes." Ginny's expression softened instantly, worry replacing her annoyance. "I know it's been rough, but if we don't stick to the Chronomonkey Charms timetable, the whole plan falls apart." Harry sighed, tension leaking from his shoulders. "Yeah, well, I'd rather fall apart in my sleep than at dawn." Draco Malfoy, leaning against a nearby column, watched them with narrowed eyes. He had no clue what this Chronomonkey charm was, or why Harry Potter was up before sunrise every day, but the look of pure exhaustion on Harry's face was enough to make him curious. Before Draco could step forward and ask more questions, Ron Weasley came trotting up, a grin splitting his face. "Ah, come on, Harry. Admit it, you've got a thing for both Ginny and Ms. Grey now, haven't you?" Harry and Ginny exchanged a startled glance. Then both shouted, "Shut up, Ron," in perfect unison, their cheeks flushing. Instantly, they dropped their weapons of choice, harried words, and embraced, finding a moment of peace amid the morning chaos. Ron rolled his eyes, Draco raised an eyebrow, and somewhere in the back of Harry's mind, the alarm ticking toward 6 o'clock tomorrow morning already began to stir. Chapter 217. Confused Harry tick-tock. Tick-tock. Rain drummed softly on the eaves while overhead, a clock of crystalline spring water and carved stone marked the passing seconds. Below it, on a plush pink four-poster bed, Ryan lay stretched out in white silk pajamas, hands folded behind his head as he stared at the ceiling. A steady stream of invisible magical energy flowed from him, sustaining Luna and Hermione's bodies at Hogwarts and upholding every detail of his vast mindscape, the void world of his thoughts. Nearly 7 years had passed since Ryan traveled back in time. Since then, he'd clung to his humanity through love and the occasional indulgence, wary of letting godlike power or boredom erode his ability to savor life's small wonders. After all, if every day felt meaningless, everything would taste bland. That was why Ryan rarely interfered with others. Only once in a while would he step off the original timeline to tweak a minor detail, and then sit back to watch how reality would unfold. Ryan stifled a yawn. The familiar back and forth between Ron and Ginny, the same arguments he'd watched play out time and again in the original timeline, held little interest for him. Sure, their bickering was entertaining, but he'd long since moved on. What he really wanted to see was how Harry would face his newfound freedom. No more Dursleys, no more unwanted returns to Privet Drive. Now that Harry was truly free, what choice would he make? Down the corridor on Hogwarts' 4th floor, Ron was about to launch into yet another quip when he suddenly bit his tongue. Watching Harry and Ginny wrapped in each other's arms, he seemed to have an epiphany. Of course, he knew Harry's character better than most. If both Harry and Ginny were happy, who was he to interfere? Besides, a bit of peace in his friend's life could only strengthen their bond, far better than squabbling over petty rivalries like those with Draco. Clearing his throat, Ron adopted an expression of earnest concern he seldom used. "Harry, have you made a decision yet? About the Dursleys. Do you want to go back to them?" Harry and Ginny looked up, surprised at the sudden serious tone in Ron's voice. The shift from teasing to genuine care caught them both off guard, and to Ryan, it was infinitely more compelling than any recycled argument. Ginny released Harry's hand with a sharp exhale and closed her eyes. "What are you up to, Ron?" He shrugged, pretending indifference. But Ginny wasn't fooled. She opened her eyes again, suspicion flickering across her face. "You're not plotting to call in the Dursleys and have them forbid my engagement to Harry, are you?" Ron rolled his eyes. "That's absurd." Ginny shook her head, unconvinced. "It's not impossible. You know how Petunia feels about all this. She's never forgiven Harry for reminding her how much magic cost her. From Aunt Petunia's point of view, Harry's father was a corrupting influence, once Lily's husband, now her nephew's. I'd only be stepping into Lily's place in Petunia's heart. Do you really think she'd just let me marry Harry?" Ron snorted. "And just as she couldn't stop Harry from coming to Hogwarts, she certainly won't be able to meddle in your romance." Ginny shot him an exasperated look, but Ron refused to back down. Harry watched them both, struck suddenly by how their bickering felt so unmistakably brother and sister. For the first time, he realized just how deep the Weasley family ties really ran. He'd never really believed it before. With so many Weasleys in Britain, Harry had always entertained the thought that Ron might have been adopted. Maybe one of the countless Weasley children had been orphaned and taken in by Arthur and Molly. But now he'd noticed something unmistakable. Ginny's thought patterns were every bit as odd as Ron's. That could only mean one thing. Ron and Ginny were true siblings, sharing both the same mother and father. Harry turned to Ginny. "You know how Ron is, right? He always gives up halfway through anything he starts." Ginny nodded, a rueful smile tugging at her lips. "Completely." A strange impulse seized Harry. He ran a hand through Ginny's hair and after a moment's hesitation said, It's made me think. I want to go back to the Dursleys' house, maybe just for a day or two." The room fell silent. Then Ron, Ginny, and Draco all spoke at once, their voices a mixture of shock and alarm. "Did you just say you want to go back to the Dursleys? You're mad!" Harry met their eyes evenly. For the first time, he wasn't so sure. Harry leaned against the windowsill in the Gryffindor common room, watching snowflakes drift past the window. "I'm not mad," he muttered to himself, though his voice shook with suppressed anger. "But I do hate the Dursleys." He ran a hand through his hair. This stubborn determination, just like his drive in the competition, came from one simple wish: not to lose to Dudley. The thought of letting his cousin think he'd beaten him was unbearable. For months, Harry had toyed with the idea of walking away from Privet Drive for good. At school, he and Dudley barely exchanged a word. Harry didn't even know which classes his cousin took. Then this morning, Sirius's letter had arrived, each elegant line promising freedom. "You don't have to go back there." Harry pressed the parchment to his chest, letting the revelation sink in. In that moment, Dumbledore's words finally made sense. No matter how cruel the Dursleys had been, somewhere out in the world was someone brave enough to defy the wizarding establishment and welcome him, magic and all. A place where he belonged. He glanced at Draco, whose eyebrows were raised in surprise, then at Ron and Ginny, who were watching him with open curiosity. Harry couldn't help but grin wryly. "Stop staring," he told them. "I still hate the Dursleys. I really do." He paused, steeling himself. "But I'm not ready to leave them forever. Privet Drive is where I grew up. It's part of me." He set his jaw firmly. "I'll write to Sirius later. For now, I'll stay with the Dursleys a few more days. Let them resent me, yet be powerless to kick me out." A laugh bubbled up from his chest, light and free. "Then, I'll go to Sirius." At last, the weight of his decision felt right. He caught Uncle Vernon's piggish glare and saw Aunt Petunia twisting her long neck in a strange mix of annoyance and fear. Then, with a sharp blink, Harry shook himself back to the present. He pressed a hand to his forehead, as if to banish the sudden memory. A pang of regret hit him. Dudley wasn't the same bully he'd known, a boorish, overgrown, cartoonish figure, like a hefty Darth Vader straight out of some Skywalker-themed Doraemon comic. Now Dudley was almost polite, constantly asking after Harry's welfare, wearing a nervous smile that made Harry uneasy. Draco noticed the change in Harry's expression and prodded, "Regretting something?" Harry sighed. "I was just thinking about Dudley." Ron rolled his eyes. "I'd trade for the old Dudley in a heartbeat." Harry shook his head and managed a wry grin. "You're both mad." Ron exchanged a worried look with Ginny. Since Harry had replaced his blood with that silver-white potion, they'd all wondered whether its effects lingered, perhaps even clouding Harry's mind. "It's nearly 6, Ron said, trying to lift the mood. "Let's head to the hall for dinner, then go back to the dormitory for some sleep. You'll feel clearer after you've rested." Ginny nodded in agreement. A good night's sleep should sort you out. Chapter 218, Year-End Dinner. At last, Ron and the others pretended to accept Harry's claim, but privately, they were convinced he still hadn't fully come to terms with it. He was probably dreaming that he'd once been nothing more than the Dursleys' poor, put-upon nephew. In reality, Harry insisted he was a wizard, and to prove it to himself, he'd even asked to spend a few more days at number 4, Privet Drive, just so he could wake up and see the truth. When Harry stopped by to say hello to Professor Lupin, Ron hid half his face behind one hand and muttered, "Are you sure you're not still asleep?" Ginny and Draco nodded in agreement, and for the rest of the summer term, nobody dared bring the subject up again. Instead, whenever they had a spare moment, all 5 of them raced off to Hagrid's hut. His home was a surprisingly cool retreat, so cozy it felt as if someone had left the air conditioning running in mid-June. Lavender Brown watched it all with growing admiration. She'd always thought Ron a bit rough around the edges, but seeing him greet the gentle giant Hagrid with nothing but warmth made her rethink her opinion. Before they knew it, the castle was buzzing with excitement for the end-of-year feast. Great swaths of blue and bronze ribboned the walls and ceiling in honor of Ravenclaw's back-to-back House Cup victory. At the head of the hall, a massive banner bore the proud Raven Eagle sigil of Ravenclaw, reminding everyone why they'd come to celebrate and to toast the close of another unforgettable year at Hogwarts. Harry slid into a seat at the Ravenclaw table between Ron and Ginny. Beside Ginny were Ryan, Hermione, and Luna, deep in quiet conversation. Ron looked ready to pipe up. Harry could almost hear him say, "Ryan's amazing, handling 2 witches at once, no problem." Yet ever since their last trip to Moon City, Ron had learned better than to blurt out remarks about Ryan's talents. His trademark boldness was now tempered by caution. He knew when to hold back to avoid offending someone he couldn't afford to cross. At the high table, Dumbledore was speaking softly with Professor McGonagall, and every moment Harry expected him to rise and address the school. Truth be told, Harry was looking forward to the speech, if only to shift attention away from himself. He'd noticed too many curious stares all morning, and the feeling of being on display made him uneasy. That's why he'd spent as much time as possible down by Hagrid's. Not only was the giant's hut pleasantly cool, but the beech trees on the hillside above the Black Lake provided a shady spot where Harry could relax and watch the witches splashing in the water without feeling like everyone was watching him. Ever since the spectacular match against Dudley, where Harry not only held his own, but showcased some brilliantly enchanted Muggle contraptions, his star has been rising among Quidditch fans. Those novel gadgets certainly drew the crowds, but every Hogwarts student knows the game inside and out, and they could see that Harry's skills that day rivaled the best seekers in the world. His reputation, already solid, soared to new heights overnight. Just a few days ago, a group of senior Hufflepuff girls tried to humiliate him with banners proclaiming Krum is the greatest, Potter is useless. Their stunt had the opposite effect. Suddenly, students who'd never given Harry a second glance were talking about him in every corridor. Meanwhile, the infirmary has been extra busy. Some witches are still recovering from the fallout of this drama, and the Ravenclaw common room has turned into a parade of hopefuls. Young women from 3 other houses troop in daily, convinced they're destined to be Harry's next girlfriend. Ginny, furious at all the attention he's getting, decided to set things right, her own way. She released a flock of near-invisible, downright vicious bats into the common room. The result? Poor Harry ended up with several bat bites before anyone even realized what was happening. And now, as he's limping between classes and the infirmary wing, everyone's whispering about just how far Ginny will go to claim her place at his side. Harry was certain the newcomer was innocent, and he couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, wondering if they might be the same person. Desperate to hide himself, he even approached Neville Longbottom, hoping Neville would teach him the concealment circle he'd learned from Ryan. Neville refused, insisting Harry must first get Ryan's permission, and of course, Ryan had vanished again in the last few days. Harry spent that time dodging the curiosity of his classmates, until at last the end-of-year feast arrived, and he saw Ryan seated at the long Ravenclaw table. Moments later, time itself seemed to slow as Professor Dumbledore rose to speak. The low hum of conversation faltered and faded. Every student turned to watch him. "Another year," he began, voice warm, carrying its usual weight, "has drawn to a close." He paused, letting his half-moon spectacles sweep the hall, then fixed his gaze on the Ravenclaws. "Before we enjoy our feast, I must spoil the fun with a few words." A ripple of nervous excitement passed through the tables. "You've no doubt noticed that Ravenclaw has won the House Cup this year," Dumbledore continued, "but there is one thing you may have missed." His eyes twinkled as the students shrank back, bracing themselves for whatever revelation he was about to deliver. At the end-of-term feast, Professor Dumbledore rose and cleared his throat. The House Cup standings are as follows. Gryffindor, 17 points in 4th place, Hufflepuff, 35 points 3rd, Slytherin, 49 points 2nd, and Ravenclaw, 108 points, leading the pack. To everyone's surprise, the Ravenclaw table remained unusually subdued, heads bowed in quiet discretion, while the other houses exchanged uneasy glances. Dumbledore's gentle smile turned steely as he looked over at Argus Filch, who puffed out his chest in pride. "Some of you might be inclined to blame our caretakers' increased authority for Gryffindor's misfortunes, but the real issue, after so many point deductions, is not whether Filch is more powerful. What you must learn is that sneaking out for midnight escapades isn't courage, it's recklessness." He paused, letting the words sink in, then addressed the Scarlet and Gold directly. I am profoundly disappointed to see Gryffindor fall from third to last place in just 1 month. A hush fell over the hall. Then, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled as he added, "Now I know you all are eagerly anticipating next year's highlight, the Triwizard Tournament." A ripple of applause swept through the students. Though still chastened by the headmaster's rebuke, they could not hide their excitement at the promise of new challenges and the chance to prove themselves once more. With a fond smile, Dumbledore rose from the high table and surveyed the hushed great hall. "For the first time," he began, "our famed inter-school tournament will not be contested by just 3 schools, but 4. Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and the newly invited Castrumbush." A ripple of surprise ran through the students. Dumbledore held up a hand. "Professor McGonagall advised me to save this announcement for the start of term in September, but you have an entire summer before then. If you let your skills grow rusty now, you'll arrive in autumn ill-prepared for the challenges ahead." He paused, locking eyes with Harry. "As always, each school will choose its champion to face the trials. This year, however, we add a new element. Beyond the champion's feats, every spell you master and every task you complete over the summer will count toward your school's overall score." A low hum of excitement swept the hall. Dumbledore continued, "So I urge you, use these rare vacation months to practice your magic, study diligently, and ready yourselves for the semi-final challenges. Yes, you may perform spells outside school boundaries, but only in service of tournament preparation. Any other unauthorized magic remains forbidden and will be dealt with by the Ministry." He raised his hands, a mischievous, twinkle in his eyes. "Enough talk. Let's begin the feast." Chapter 219, Discovery at the End of the Second School Year. The blazing midday sun hung mercilessly above Hogwarts' great cast-iron gates, glaring down on the winged boar statues that crowned the pillars and shimmered in the heat. On the road outside, the students, clad in plain Muggle clothes, huddled in the shade of nearby trees, eagerly awaiting the empty carriage that would carry them off school grounds. Without warning, an unnatural cold washed over them. There was no gust of wind to rustle the leaves, no sudden cloud to dim the sun's glare, and certainly no rain in sight. Yet the temperature plummeted, sending gooseflesh racing across every arm and neck. They turned toward the disturbance and saw him striding across the lawn. Rubeus Hagrid, Hogwarts' beloved half-giant gamekeeper. For a moment, his broad shoulders and shock of flame-red hair made a few of them blink in surprise. He looked, at first glance, like one of the Weasley family standing in the sun. But then they realized his hair wasn't merely bright. It glowed as though each strand were a living ember, drawing every scrap of warmth from the air. Stepping out from under the leafy canopy felt like walking into a sudden downpour of chill. Hagrid paused just short of the carriage circle, his great coat dusted with pine needles. He gave a soft, apologetic cough. "Sorry to keep ye waitin', everyone," he rumbled, his voice as warm and deep as ever. "Had a bit of business to see to before I left the grounds." The students released their breath in unison, relief and curiosity mingling in the suddenly frosty air. Whatever Hagrid had been up to, it clearly held secrets worth waiting for, and this unexpected chill was only the beginning of their discoveries. "Thanks for everything, Hagrid," Ron panted, wiping sweat from his brow as the giant lumbered back toward them. "Any sign of the Thestrals yet?" Ginny asked, brushing damp strands of hair out of her face as she climbed down from Harry's shoulders. A recent spell kept Harry's body at a perfect, unflinching temperature, even under the blazing sun. Hagrid cleared his throat, an odd stiffness in his shoulders. From beneath his heavy beard, he pointed to the tiny dragon curled atop his head and rumbled, "This is Hephaestus. The moment he heard we wouldn't meet up again for over 2 months, he begged to come along." Ginny leaned forward, eyes wide. "So are you really going back to Privet Drive?" Hagrid's expression softened. "I've already been there once. Saw their faces when I went to fetch Harry last term." Ron exchanged a worried look with Harry. "Dudley's changed a bit, maybe," he said, "but what about Vernon and Petunia?" Hagrid sighed and glanced at Harry. "Harry, you really ought to think about this." Harry rolled his eyes. "I know what you're getting at. No point arguing." Hagrid hesitated. "You're not here to talk me into staying like Lupin." "Serious too," Harry finished for him. The distant thud of thestral hooves reached their ears. Hagrid held up a massive hand. "All right, I won't push. Just so you know, I'll pop by Privet Drive for a couple of days. Keep an eye on things." Harry gave a small nod. He scooped Ginny into his arms once more and climbed into the waiting carriage. With one last wave to Hagrid and to Hephaestus perched in Hagrid's shaggy hair, they set off toward home. Ginny settled in beside Harry, while Ron took the seat facing them. Across the aisle, Draco Malfoy squeezed in with Crabbe, Goyle, and Pansy Parkinson, though his cronies mostly kept their distance, unlike Ron, who never missed a chance to hover around Harry and Ginny. Harry's roommates, Anthony, Terry, Michael, and Neville, stepped into the next carriage without a second thought. They'd grown used to Harry wanting his own space on the ride to and from classes. Anthony often grumbled about Ron's lack of discretion, especially when Ron, despite having a girlfriend, still barged into what should have been Harry and Ginny's private moments. Rumor, even Rita Skeeter's wild speculation, once hinted at something more than friendship between the two boys. The others half joked there was enough awkward evidence to believe it. "Catch up with us later, Harry," Anthony called over his shoulder as the door closed behind them. No sooner had they gone than Ron leaned forward, ignoring the gentle squeeze Ginny gave Harry's hand. "So, when did Lupin persuade you to do this?" he asked, as if it were the most natural question in the world, and not the most insensitive. Ginny rolled her eyes at her brother, but she refused to let him see her irritation. "I'm only quoting what you and Draco said," she shot back. "You were both convinced I was still dreaming, that I'd have to go back to the Dursleys just to prove I really was a witch." Harry let out an exasperated sigh. "Honestly, Ron, I don't understand why you'd rather camp out here than go see Ginny. You have a girlfriend, after all. Draco wouldn't drop Pansy for this." Ron's face went pale. You actually heard that?" "It's Finnear's body transfiguration spell," Harry explained. "Somebody recorded our conversation with it." Ron stared at them, shock dawning in his eyes. The last person who would have thought twice about what he muttered behind everyone's back, including Harry, had just discovered how precarious gossip could be. Even Argus Filch and Professor Lupin were rumored to have mastered Finnear's powerful magic. There was no privacy left. "It's over," Ron whispered, sinking onto the bench. "Finnear's transfiguration is that good. Before long, half the school will be using it. No one can be trusted or left unrecorded." Ginny crossed her arms and fixed him with a cold stare. "Does that drive it home?" she asked. "Maybe now you'll think twice before bad-mouthing anyone." Ron buried his face in his hands, utterly chastened. Ginny allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "I get it now." Ron's face brightened. "From now on, I'll practice the ear-blocking charm non-stop." Harry glanced at him, eyebrows raised. "That just occurred to you?" "It makes sense," Ron pressed on. "Your silencing charm at the Shrieking Shack was brilliant, trapping all sound in a tight bubble so no one could eavesdrop. But the ear-blocking charm? You cast it and everyone in range hears only a dull buzzing, except for the people you want to listen. It's simpler and far more practical." Ginny stifled a laugh at her brother's sudden epiphany, and Harry ducked his head into her hair to hide his grin. Worse yet, the very mute spell Ron was hailing had been one of Harry's Christmas gifts. A hasty entry in that little spell book Harry carried. It was stuffed with oddball charms, a hex that made people's toes sprout like twisted vines, another that glued the tongue to the roof of the mouth, and other delightfully impractical ideas. But Ron's excitement was infectious. If mastering the ear-blocking charm made secret conversations truly private, Harry supposed it would prove useful after all. What's caught everyone's attention is a spell called the Upside-Down Bell, one of those rare charms that can suspend a person by the ankles, dangling helplessly in midair. Yet there sat Ron, flicking through the marginal notes as if he were browsing a menu, and cast it on Harry before any of them had a chance to test it properly. Worse still, the handwriting looked nothing like any standard ministry-approved incantation. "Ginny, don't give me that look," Ron protested, brushing a lock of hair from his eyes. Ginny folded her arms, her brow tight. "It's the magic in that silly booklet." Ron rolled his eyes. "I checked with Lupin later. Well, after he went off hiding because of Tonks, he said these spells were all the rage back in his day. Totally harmless, and loads of students at Hogwarts have tried them out." Ginny said nothing. An awkward silence settled among them, broken only when the carriage gave a sudden lurch and clanged to a halt. The Thestrals, visible only to Harry and his friends, snorted and nudged forward, rubbing their cold, skeletal snouts against Harry's outstretched palm. In the surge of arriving passengers, Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Hermione hurried into an empty compartment. Still stewing over the upside-down bell, Ron reached under his cloak and produced Scabbers, who blinked up at him with weary eyes as Ron absently stroked his slick fur. Harry unhooked Hedwig's cage, allowing the snowy owl to settle on his head and give his scalp a gentle, affectionate peck. Ginny, meanwhile, unfolded a copy of The Quibbler, Luna's latest issue, and began flipping through its pages as the clatter of wheels on rails signaled their departure. By the time they reached King's Cross, Harry hardly remembered the journey. It was only as he waved farewell to Ron and Ginny that everything clicked into place. Luna, standing a few paces off, cradled a sleek black cat in her arms, the very creature whose sudden meow had greeted Ginny that night in the corridors. That plaintive cry had drawn Filch straight to them, spoiling their escape, and now Harry knew exactly whose pet it was, Ryan's famously rotund cat, Jerry. Chapter 444, New Variables to be Inserted. Kate and Penelope crept deeper into the cave beneath Smith Castle, their path marked by the soft glow of fairy lights. First they passed life-size sculptures of a thunderbird, a phoenix, a niffler, and other magical beasts. Then they skirted towering stalactites until they rounded a corner and froze. Before them stood a line of human-shaped stone statues, each poised upon its own marble plinth in what looked like a deeply embarrassing posture. The armor they wore was as bizarre as their stances. One suit resembled a wizard's robe drawn tight around a crystalline, ruby-tipped helm. Another appeared to be two incompatible armors crudely fused together. A few suits even looked as if they had grown organically on the figures' bodies, their ridged plates and vein-like protrusions giving the impression of living, pulsing armor. Yet despite the unsettling variety, neither Kate nor Penelope could look away from the statue in the very center. It was unlike the others, and something about its presence made the flickering fairy lights feel suddenly too dim. They pushed deeper into the cavern until the walls fell away to reveal a smooth stone dais. Atop it stood a single statue, a striking figure of a handsome young man, one hand splayed on his hip, the other pressed to his chest as if mid-spell. Unlike the other time-worn sculptures around it, this one gleamed, fresh marble bore no dust or cracks. Carved at its base in bold Arabic numerals was a single date, 1992. Beneath the platform, seated in an ornate chair of white marble, was Ryan, the very friend who had summoned them here. Kate, restless as a fawn, bounded around the dais, her eyes darting from the figure to the inscription and back again. "Kid," she called up to Ryan, "why the vanity project down here in the innermost cave? Dragging us all the way just so we can gawk at your statue." She traced the numbers etched under each sculpture, 1992, 1991, 1990, 1973. Finally, she looked to Penelope. "What do you make of those dates?" Penelope stepped forward, brow furrowed. "I've double-checked every significant year in Ryan's life. Birth dates, anniversaries, triumphs. None of them match 1992. Ryan smiled and rose from his seat. "You're looking at an experiment." He outstretched a single finger, and, to their astonishment, newspapers began to materialize out of thin air. 19 front pages glided into being, each falling into place in a neat row before Kate and Penelope. They stared, mouths agape. "How is this possible?" Penelope whispered, hand flying to her lips. "Merlin's beard," Kate breathed, eyes wide with delight. Ever since she was 7, she'd possessed an insatiable hunger for information, and right now, she realized, they were witnessing a spectacle worthy of that appetite. Kate spent every waking hour chasing down rumors, and the Daily Prophet was one of her most trusted sources. In fact, she couldn't remember ever skipping an issue since 1983. Yet today's papers felt different, page after page of reports she'd never seen before. One headline in particular caught her eye. 1973, Pennines excavation, Gringotts Cursebreaker, Vincent Bowen's team slain. According to the article, Bowen, legendary for dismantling the most treacherous dark curses, had unearthed an ancient bronze coffin adorned with a petrified belt design. The moment they pried it open, Every member of his crew was slaughtered by an entity that called itself Kuga. Beside the column was a photograph of a weathered statue dated 1973, a full-body suit of armor shaped like a giant stag beetle. Its contours matched the paper's photo perfectly, as if the armor had stepped straight out of the page and into reality. Kate frowned. Vincent Bowen? She'd always known him as a renowned curse-breaker, but several years ago he'd simply vanished, reputation intact and no trace left behind. And yet, this article referred to him as a dark wizard. Even more puzzling was the wording, unknown life form. Shouldn't the prophet have called it an unknown magical creature? Leaning back, she tapped her chin thoughtfully. She'd even spotted a few of Bowen's supposed followers skulking in Nocturne Alley last month. None of this aligned with her memories, or with any logical interpretation of magical taxonomy. Something wasn't right, and Kate was determined to uncover exactly what it was. In 1975, a strange legend swept through Devonshire. They said that among the thousands of mirrors broken across the county, one shattered pane could open a gateway to the fabled mirror world. The tale went that a flaming knight, riding the fearsome Pluto dragon, and Grey Dever, the local newspaper publisher who was secretly a wizard, both met their end before that very mirror. In his final hours, Devor sketched a figure in full medieval armor, then died under mysterious circumstances. And just as suddenly as it began, the story died too. Grey Devor? Penelope murmured, staring down at the yellowed newspaper clipping. He truly was a Devonshire wizard, but he died years ago. After his death, authorities discovered dozens of missing Muggle bodies in his basement. She traced a finger over the crude pencil drawing of the knight. Then she looked up at the statue standing opposite her, a stone knight poised on a pedestal, stamped with the date 1975. The armor, the stance, every detail matched Devor's sketch exactly. Penelope's brow furrowed. Somehow, the old legend was more than myth, and it might be far from over. Amelia dropped the battered newspapers on the desk with a thud. The faded headlines and yellowing pages fluttered like exhausted ghosts. Across from her, Rowan's face went pale. "Kid, I've connected the dots," Amelia said, her voice steady, eyes locked on him. "Every wizard you touted in these articles, the ghost controller, the so-called vampire king, the rogue mad scientist, the detective with split personalities, even that cameraman who claimed he'd destroy the world, they're all dark wizards who died mysteriously in recent years." Rowan opened his mouth, then closed it. Amelia flipped to a page stamped Issue 14, 1982. "See this date?" she asked. "Your ghost controller first appeared here, but in real life, he was killed that same year. And here," she pointed to Issue 17, 1985. "The Vampire King, history records, he was executed in 85. Every single one lines up." He swiped at a loose sheet. I was just telling stories based on local legends." "Legends you twisted into proof, confined to this one sleepy town so no one would double-check," she replied. "And you called it an experiment, remember? All those cryptic hints about testing public belief in the supernatural? It's a cover. You fabricated the newspapers yourself." Rowan's cheeks reddened. "But you and Penelope—" "Don't play innocent," Amelia cut in. "You had Penelope refine the narrative, add flair, emotional hooks. I handled distribution. Each time you left deliberate gaps, loopholes we'd fill in, making us complicit in your little social experiment." He stood abruptly, chair scraping. "You two agreed to help me." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "We thought you'd gone off the rails. We wanted to intervene, not get trapped in your scheme. But you led us right where you wanted, exposed your own fraud." A long silence settled, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Rowan sank back into his chair, the weight of his deception pressing down on him. The phantom wizards had vanished, and there was no place left for him to hide. Kate spread the newspapers across the table, her index finger tapping one headline after another. "In Muggle terms, this is just a social experiment," she said confidently. "You want to see how many people will swallow these ridiculous stories." Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "You actually planted fake relics at those alleged sites to trick everyone?" Kate nodded, her little face alight with triumph. "Exactly. You left evidence behind so people would believe. Is there any chance these newspapers might be telling the truth?" Ryan asked, exasperated. Penello exchanged a glance with Kate and shook his head. "Truthful? No, this isn't a social experiment. Ryan frowned. Then what is it? Penello's gaze grew distant. It's an experiment of time. He paused, as though choosing his words carefully. Over the past years, I've traveled to dozens of small towns across the UK, each stay lasting exactly 1 year. In each place, I assumed the guise of a resurrected dark wizard and wove a short-lived legend confined to that town. I've rehearsed every detail of these fabrications in my mind thousands of times, planting relics, orchestrating sightings, controlling every rumor so convincingly that history itself seemed to rewrite itself around me. Kate and Ryan exchanged stunned looks as the weight of his revelations settled over them. What began as an alleged social experiment had in fact been a carefully staged journey through time, and their part in the story had only just begun. At last, I've confirmed, it won't affect the story's future direction. It seems I was successful. As long as I possess this ability, any tales I weave in won't shift the timeline we already call the present. After all, Ryan added with a wry smile, the magical world is full of bizarre legends. You see plenty of those in the Quibbler, don't you? Penello frowned. But what about our memories? Why haven't they changed? How could we not even notice? Ryan shrugged. That's thanks to my protective enchantment. It shields you from any temporal fallout. He paused, as if weighing his next words. So you think I brought us here just to show off my little experiment? Penello crossed her arms. They'd been married long enough to know when one of them was hiding something. Is that all this is? No, Ryan said gently. I wanted your opinion. Every one of those crazy-sounding stories holds a kernel of truth. Now I can take any knightly order, anyone except the Time King Kronos, from 1992, and elevate their origin until it's recognized across the entire magical community. So, which background should we promote? The Mirror World, Game Sickness, or Nebula Gas? Penello tilted her head, studying him. Why is it only the Time King's title that's been altered? Kronos, the one trapped by time, shouldn't his story change too? Chapter 2, Mirror World, Expansion. The chamber was bathed in flickering torchlight, every shadow dancing across the ancient stone walls. Ryan stood before the lifelike statue at its center, his mind racing as he sifted through the torrent of magical possibilities it revealed. Vampires, an evolved breed of vampire race? Ryan's brows knit together. That's far too dangerous. As a vampire hunter, I can't allow it. Kate, who had placed her hand on the statue moments ago, felt the flood of information filling her thoughts. She rubbed her temples, processing the next threat. Nebula gas, she ventured. A volatile, gas-like potion that can spontaneously appear and turn ordinary muggles into magic users? It's far too unstable this early in our development. Ryan's eyes narrowed as another concept unfurled in his mind. World Destroyer? A wizard cursed with the loss of all magic, reborn as a being who can warp space itself? Unacceptable as well. For a heartbeat, the three of them stood in tense silence. Then, faint glyphs lit up along the statue's base, painting new symbols in a ribbon of silver light. Mirror World? Kate breathed, recalling the lore of a parallel realm born of reflections. It doesn't seem inherently hostile. In fact, it might become the next frontier, the future territory for wizards. Penello stepped closer, his expression hopeful. So that's our choice? Ryan reached out and gently rested his hand on Kate's head, a gesture of reassurance. Yes, Penello, Kate will focus on the Mirror World. Kate blinked, her eyes softening as if she'd just woken from a dream. Right, she murmured. Just the Mirror World. Good, Ryan said with a small smile. Penello and I graduate next year. We need something stable, something we can manage until then. Kate nodded, still a little dazed but certain. The Mirror World. And with that decision made, their journey into the realm beyond the looking glass began. Kate's jaw dropped as she absorbed Ryan's revelations. She had always known he was powerful, the greatest wizard alive, but she'd never imagined just how vast his strength truly was. The secrets locked within those 20 statues left her reeling. Each knight power Ryan spoke of possessed enough raw force to reshape the world, and the most astonishing of all was the sealed-away ability of Kamen Rider Kronos. Unlike the clunky, material-based time converter toys that often jammed or broke, Kronos was pure wizardry incarnate, a genuine mastery over time itself. What stunned Kate even more was that every one of these powers, and every derivative spell tied to them, had been buried in obscure villages across the British countryside. Local legends had long forgotten their origins. The original wizards had drifted into obscurity. Unless Ryan chose to release them, these forces would remain locked away forever, their potentials lost to history. He turned to Kate, his eyes shining with determination. Now, the mirror world will unfold. At his command, time itself tore apart, fracturing like the scales of an immense celestial Ouroboros. Ryan's boundless magic seeped into each temporal shard, weaving them together into a new reality. Far below street level, in a dusty basement in Devon, a large mirror, shrouded in filthy linen, shuddered violently. Crackling energy danced across its surface, heralding the birth of a realm that only the combined power of wizards worldwide could bring into being. Under the endless pulse of magic, the mirror world that once lay hidden beneath the Devon town of Axminster has begun to shift and spread, its boundaries slipping free of that small corner of reality. Ryan leaned back in his chair, cracking his neck with a soft pop. "It's not confined to Axminster anymore," he announced, his voice calm but charged with excitement. Penello's brow shot upward. "You mean it's out there now, beyond the town?" "Exactly," Ryan folded his arms. "Every mirror you break carries a chance, 1 in 1,000 shatters at least, to reveal a doorway. Crack enough glass and eventually you'll open the portal to the mirror world." Kate glanced at the silver-framed mirror hanging over the mantel, its surface calm and undisturbed. "That realm," she asked quietly, "is it just a perfect reflection of ours?" "Nothing so simple," Ryan replied, his eyes distant. "It's the inverse of everything we know. Where we are light, there is shadow. Where we are truth, there is hidden desire. It's a world built from the parts of us we never show." Penello leaned forward. "And the mirror beasts, those creatures said to have vanished from every legend. How do they survive there?" He swallowed. "Do they feed on us, on our lives, the way stories claim?" A slow, strange smile curved Ryan's lips. He said nothing for a long moment, as if weighing whether to confirm the old tales. Kate turned to him, her voice steady despite the room's growing tension. "What do they see when they peer back at our world? Ourselves, or something else entirely?" Ryan met her gaze and finally spoke. "They see everything we've hidden, our fears, our regrets, the darkness tucked away in our hearts, and they thrive on it." Silence followed, heavy and expectant. Outside, the wind rattled 100 panes of glass across Axminster, each one a potential gateway to the unknown, each one a reflection of the truths waiting to be uncovered. "That's it," the wizard said, his voice echoing softly in the cavernous chamber. "It's always been there," he continued, gesturing toward the great mirror before him. "Since the very first mirror was crafted, I only forged its frame and infused it with my enchantments." He paused, letting the words hang in the cool air. "Desire is born in the human heart. As long as mortals and wizards walk the earth, and as long as the magical field we weave endures, this mirror, too, will endure." A slow smile curved the wizard's lips. With a graceful sweep of his arm, the stone dais on which they stood trembled, then sank into the earth with a deep rumble. The towering statues flanking the mirror followed suit, vanishing into the darkness below. 4 Privet Drive. Harry Potter stirred to the familiar coo of Hedwig and the soft scrape of his window being pushed open. He lay on the floor of Dudley's hand-me-down bedroom, an eclectic jumble of discarded toys and outgrown clothes, and blinked up at the ceiling. Perched on the sill, Hedwig balanced a small gray mouse in one talon. With her fluffy head, she nudged the window wider. Harry yawned, swung his legs over the edge of the mattress, and reached for the piece of nylon sheathed around the wardrobe mirror. Carefully, he tugged it into place, obscuring the glass. It had been windy all week, so Harry rarely closed the window at night. Each dawn, Hedwig's insistent tapping woke him precisely on time. He offered her a bleary smile, then deftly dodged her affectionate peck on the nose and stretched out a hand. The morning air was crisp and faintly scented with dew. Harry let it wash over him for a moment before turning back to his small room. Yet lately, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something familiar, was watching him from behind that covered mirror. Harry had developed a strange habit of draping cloths over every shiny surface he could find. Normally, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia would have ridiculed him without mercy, but after years spent sleeping in a dark, cramped cupboard under the stairs, Harry would have taken their jeers in stride, yet he knew he'd never hear them again. That, more than anything, felt like freedom. Meanwhile, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia were utterly enchanted by Dudley's new magical talent. Although the Ministry still refused to legalize his wizarding license in the Muggle world, Dudley clearly hadn't let that stop him. He didn't even know how he'd picked up such perfect household spells, but he was determined to show them off. With a graceful flick of his wand, Dudley banished every oil stain and speck of dust from the kitchen floor. Another wave coaxed a steady ribbon of mayonnaise from an open jar, depositing it neatly on his sandwich. A few brisk motions trimmed his now baggy jeans, baggy because he'd slimmed down so dramatically that even Uncle Vernon had gone on a diet in an attempt to catch up, into a perfectly tailored fit. Mrs. Weasley later teased that if Dudley had been a witch, he'd make an ideal husband. After all, what could be more desirable than flawless housekeeping magic? Because of Dudley's recent antics, Harry's strange requests, like insisting there be no mirrors in the house, had been granted without question by Uncle Vernon and his circle of friends. Harry, however, only caught the tail end of one particularly revealing conversation. "That boy's just full of himself because of Dudley's muscles now," Uncle Vernon was saying. "He won't even look in a mirror, the coward." "And look at how scrawny he is," Aunt Petunia snapped back. "He's as thin as his father ever was. I still don't know why Lily married that oaf. At least Snape may look gaunt, but there's solid muscle hidden under those black robes." Harry froze. Aunt Petunia knew about Snape's physique? When Vernon balked in surprise, she huffed that she'd discovered the truth the day Snape caught her reading one of Lily's old letters, and then pushed her into a suit of armor in his office. Vernon bristled, of course, but no amount of argument could wipe the look of disbelief from his face. That exchange made one thing clear to Harry. His aunt and uncle hadn't been replaced by polyjuice imposters. But no matter how amiable their tone, or how many mirrors they removed, he still couldn't bring himself to tell them the biggest secret of all. He was engaged to Ginny Weasley. Dudley already knew all about it. Fred and George had spilled the beans on the train, but when Harry begged him to stay silent, he didn't say a word. Chapter 3. Euphemistic Retention. After their little spat in the fourth-floor corridor, Ginny had confided in Ron what she'd been worrying about, that Harry's aunt and uncle would shun him just as they'd once turned their backs on his father. Ron had brushed it off as nonsense. He hated the Dursleys as much as Harry did, but he'd never really understood how much Harry longed for their approval. Deep down, Harry craved at least the illusion of family acceptance, even if genuine warmth was out of reach. So when June 18th arrived, the day he was due to return to Sirius, Harry said nothing. The Dursleys simply assumed, as they always did, that he'd be spending the summer at his godfather's, just like last year. He slipped out of his pajamas on autopilot, opened his bedroom door, and padded downstairs. The soft hiss of bacon on the stove and the sharp tang of grease in the air told him everything he needed to know. Dudley was already up and had claimed breakfast duty. Lately, Dudley had taken to overseeing every meal. Aunt Petunia had finally put her foot down before he tried to run the entire household kitchen. Harry leaned against the banister, quietly watching Dudley flip slices of bacon. For a moment, he allowed himself a small, bitter smile. Even here, in the place that neither welcomed nor respected him, he felt the familiar ache of hoping that one day someone would remember him kindly. Harry paused at the threshold of the living room. Uncle Vernon sat in his favorite armchair, engrossed in the morning's edition of the Daily Mail. His once rounded face looked leaner, no doubt a result of the exercise routine he'd recently taken up, and the purplish tinge had all but vanished. As soon as Harry's footsteps reached the carpet, Vernon tensed and reflexively gripped the television remote. That tiny, involuntary motion, so familiar to Harry, stung like an old wound, clear proof of Uncle Vernon's enduring dislike. Aunt Petunia cleared her throat behind him, and Harry jumped, spinning around in surprise. In that moment, he realized he'd been so wrapped up in the quiet confidence born of his mother's love, and in the strange new sense of love magic he felt awakening inside him, that he hadn't even noticed her approach. He wondered, not for the first time, whether that same gentle power was responsible for the small thaw he'd lately detected in both Dudley and Petunia. Vernon, on the other hand, was not bound to him by blood. His sole devotion was to his wife and son. Any change in his behavior, Harry thought wryly, was made entirely for their sake, not his. Harry stepped over Aunt Petunia's prized Persian carpet and settled onto the left-hand sofa, ignoring Uncle Vernon's glare and Aunt Petunia's too-stiff smile. He'd noticed that since Uncle Vernon had begun his ill-fated morning fitness routine and skipped breakfast, he moved at least half a beat slower than usual. Two half-alert Dursleys were a lot easier to face than one fully roused pair. And with Dudley here too, this felt like the perfect moment. Today before lunch, Sirius would arrive to fetch him, and he intended to announce his engagement to Ginny Weasley, the youngest red-headed Weasley daughter, while he still had their full attention. Even if Aunt Petunia erupted in horror, Harry would be gone long before she could boil the kettle. Silence fell as Harry clasped his hands together and rehearsed his words. "I have an announcement," he began in his mind. "I'm engaged to Ginny Weasley." He cleared his throat, about to speak, when Dudley burst into the room, waving his wand. At his command, plates of fried eggs, bacon, and toasted sandwiches swooped off the kitchen counter and orbited around him like miniature planets. "Well, look at that," Dudley drawled, as the breakfast satellite settled neatly on a side table. "Mum said you'd like something to eat before you go." Harry's speech died on his tongue. His chance to break the news was slipping away, along with any hope of a quiet exit. "Darling Dudley, you must be exhausted," Aunt Petunia exclaimed, her eyes bright, miming with tears as she fluttered about, unsure where to rest her hands. "So, Manly, the very man of the Dursley household," Uncle Vernon added, giving his son an approving once-over. He beamed, pleased to see Dudley finally displaying the kind of rugged masculinity he'd always prized. After all, in Vernon's mind, cooking and housework were strictly a woman's work. Dudley barely glanced at them. With a deft flick of his wand, he sent his breakfast plate drifting down to the polished chestnut coffee table in front of the sofa. Then he turned to Harry. "Hello, Harry," he said coolly. "Do you even know what Quidditch is?" Harry managed a small smile, but said nothing. Uncle Vernon leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "It's like football, but only the very best players make the team. Perhaps Dudley could give you a lesson or two." Dudley sidled up to his father and whispered in his ear. Vernon's face went stiff, and he choked on a forkful of fried egg. Clearing his throat, he swallowed and glanced at Harry with something approaching respect in his eyes. Harry watched Dudley shovel food into his mouth as if he'd never tasted anything so delicious. "Our Dudley's the talk of the school," Aunt Petunia crowed, sweeping her arm toward the wall behind her. Where a fake electric stove should have been, there was now a gaping hole in the plaster. Inside, a real fireplace, its hearth still streaked with black soot from the cold spell. Aunt Petunia's very own mysophobia made the sight all the more astonishing. She would never have tolerated a real hearth so close to her precious Persian carpet until now. Harry stared. Aunt Petunia, misreading his look of surprise for admiration, beamed broadly, revealing her long, horse-like teeth. She was clearly proud that Dudley had won something at school, something Harry knew all too well was Quidditch-related, and had even persuaded classmates to set up a flu connection for their house. As Harry sat back, he could almost hear Uncle Vernon's voice. No doubt, once they got home, any talk of Quidditch would be strictly banned. And suddenly it clicked. This was why Dudley had always scowled with such disgust. Surrounded by fawning praise and never a single rebuke from his doting parents, it was no wonder Dudley had turned into such an insufferable bully. "Don't you know who's coming to our house after you leave?" Aunt Petunia chirped, as though she'd just sprung a delightful surprise. Harry frowned. "Who?" "Well, there's Cedric Diggory. His ancestor was a minister of magic, practically the British Prime Minister of the wizarding world. A very lofty position, you understand." She smiled at Harry's silence and pressed on. "Then there's Marcus Flint. His family's been prominent at Hogwarts for generations. And Michael Corner, whose parents are both prominent researchers at the Magical Congress. Dudley's chums are quite important, truly." Uncle Vernon brayed with pride from behind the morning paper, while Aunt Petunia rattled off each name as if reading aloud from a guest list. Dudley, slouched on the sofa opposite Harry, shot his cousin an apologetic look, embarrassed at his parents' performance. Harry kept his lips sealed. It would have been easy enough to point out that Draco Malfoy's family once held sway in the Ministry, or that his good friend Ron Weasley's father served as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the real power center behind the scenes. But he held back, unwilling to spoil their little parade of prestige. Just as Harry felt himself drifting off, an echo of Ginny's warning flickered in his mind. Aunt Petunia might flatter you, but she's always watching, always sizing you up. Abruptly, the meaning of her fawning tone and the endless list of important visitors clicked into place. They weren't boasting so much as vetting him. There would be a parade of Hogwarts students through the Dursleys' house this summer, courtesy of the Flu Network. And Aunt Petunia's question wasn't mere small talk. It was a test. Will you stay for the holidays and help me keep an eye on all these young witches and wizards? Harry sat up a little straighter, finally aware of the real invitation hidden behind the flattery.